I came home early to surprise my boyfriend, He Xingyan, with roses. Instead, I got the shock of my life. I heard him in bed with my best friend, Su Lingdang. Their clothes were scattered all over the floor. I grabbed a stick and kicked the door open while recording everything on my phone. He Xingyan panicked and asked why I was back early. I told him off for cheating on me with my own friend. Then he had the nerve to blame me, saying I wasted his best years because I never let him touch me in our 2 years together, even though he was the one who begged to be with me after knowing me for 8 years. Su Lingdang made it worse, bragging that she made him feel alive in ways I never could. That pushed me over the edge. I started hitting him with the stick. He told me he wanted to break up. I said fine, but I wasn't done hitting him yet. During the fight, I slipped on something, fell, and hit the back of my head. Everything went black. When I woke up, something was wrong. My hands were rough, my clothes were old and dark, and the room looked like a poor rural home. A low bed, a cement floor, a small wooden table, and a portrait of a great leader on the wall. A thin older woman came in with a bowl of millet porridge, calling me Nian Nian. I was confused and scared. Had my cheating ex knocked me out and sold me off to some remote village? Then a sharp pain hit my head, and memories flooded in. I realized I had transmigrated into a novel called Sweet as Honey in the 70s, Reborn to Stir Up Storms. My friend Su Lingdang had actually recommended this book to me, pointing out that a minor character shared my name. I'd read the whole thing, and even wrote a long angry review, because the character with my name had such a miserable fate. Now, ironically, I had become that very character, a cannon fodder side character whose stepsister, Su Ruhua, is the real heroine of the story. At least I wasn't sold to some mountain village. I drank the porridge my stepmother brought me and started figuring out my situation. From the memories flooding into my head, I pieced together the whole story. In the novel, my stepsister Su Ruhua had lived a tragic first life. She went to the countryside after high school, married a factory director's son to get back to the city, but he turned out to be abusive and infertile. She died from domestic violence at 40. Meanwhile, the original, me, had married well and lived comfortably. So when Su Ruhua was reborn, she came back determined to steal everything that was supposed to be mine, starting with my childhood sweetheart, He Songhao. By my calculation, Su Ruhua had already been reborn by the time I arrived. She'd improved her grades and learned to dress well. My father, Su Aigua, is a textile factory supervisor. After my birth mother died, along with an unborn baby, he married my stepmother. To look good in front of everyone, my stepmother made her own daughter sleep in a tiny room converted from the balcony while I got the better room. The whole neighborhood praised her as a selfless, virtuous woman. The reason the original Su Nianyan had been on a hunger strike was because she caught Su Ruhua holding love letters between her and He Songhao. She beat up Su Ruhua, but He Songhao's mother saw it and only helped Su Ruhua up without saying a word. Then He Songhao sent a letter cutting ties with her. The original Nianyan, spoiled and used to getting her way, started refusing to eat to pressure the family into making Su Ruhua give up He Songhao. When I heard someone calling for lunch, I got up and went to the table. My stepmother was surprised to see me. There were only 4 bowls of rice set out, none for me. My 9-year-old stepbrother Yaozi grumbled about having to share, and my stepmother awkwardly divided the others' portions to make me a bowl. When Su Ruhua came home from school, she tried to explain about He Songhao, acting all innocent. I just shrugged and said, "It's just a man. You can have him, there are plenty of men out there." She looked shocked. She was clearly expecting a fight, and my calm response threw her off completely. Then my father came home. Su Ruhua rushed to take his bag like a well-trained daughter. He softened at her. She'd become so impressive lately with her grades and manners. But when he saw me eating, he turned cold and mocked me. "Weren't you on a hunger strike?" "Couldn't even last that long." I just said, "You're right, it was all my fault." That caught him off guard. He had a whole lecture ready and didn't know what to do with my sudden surrender. I ate happily, scooping up every bit of pork from the dishes. My stepmother hinted I shouldn't eat so much meat after fasting. I ignored her. This body was desperate for food. Then my father cleared his throat and dropped a bombshell. You've already dropped out of school. How about you go get married? I looked up from my food when my father said I should get married. He told me my late maternal grandfather had arranged a match for me before. The man's name was Liu Huijin, a regiment commander with good height, good salary, and a strong family background. My father figured it would solve the problem of two sisters fighting over one man. I was actually interested and asked when I could meet him. But then my father mentioned the catch. Liu Huijin had been married before, and I'd have to help raise his child. I immediately lost interest. This body is only 18, and marrying a divorced man with a kid felt like a bad deal. Across the table, I could see Su Ruhua's eyes practically popping out. She clearly recognized the name Liu Huijin. With her memories from her past life, she knew he'd become someone important. She'd seen him on TV many times. She was relieved when I refused, thinking I was just as foolish as the original Nian. Then Su Ruhua tried to steer me toward someone else. She casually mentioned that a guy named Li Chong, a factory director's son, was interested in me. She went on about his family's car, their big house, new clothes every year. But I knew from the novel that Li Chong was a violent, womanizing man. In Su Ruhua's first life, she had married him herself and was beaten to death by age 40. Now she was trying to push me into that same nightmare so she could benefit. If I married into the factory director's family, my father's position would get a boost, and that would help her too when she married He Tsung-hao. I slammed my bowl down on the table and called her out. I told her if she was so eager to be a second wife, she should go marry Li Chong herself. I pointed out that his previous wife had died under suspicious circumstances. I asked her if she had no shame, an unmarried girl pushing marriage talk so eagerly, unless she'd already done something with He Tsung-hao. She fired back, saying He Tsung-hao and I were never officially together, so she didn't steal anyone. She called me a walking corpse clinging to a man who didn't love me. That was the last straw. I grabbed my father's tea and splashed it in her face, then slapped her 3 times hard. The sound echoed through the quiet room. I told her that love may not follow rules of first come, first served, but basic human decency still matters. My mother only had one daughter, and it certainly wasn't her. Those slaps were payback on behalf of the original Nian. Then I ran to my bedroom and locked the door before anyone could react. My body was still weak from days of not eating, and I wasn't sure I could win an actual fight. Outside, Su Ruhua was furious. She couldn't believe an 18-year-old had intimidated her when she'd lived a whole lifetime already. Her mother fussed over her swollen face with a towel, crying and apologizing. My father grabbed his shoe and marched toward my room, ready to beat me, but my stepmother held him back. She steered the conversation back to marrying me off to Li Chong, praising him as tall, honest, and from a family they knew well, conveniently leaving out everything dangerous about him. Behind my locked door, I could hear the conversation continuing. My stepmother was praising Li Chong to my father, calling him a fine match, remembering from her past life that Li Chong's first wife died, and he paid the family a large sum. My father's eyes lit up. He'd been stuck in the same position for nearly 10 years, and marrying me into the factory director's family could finally get him promoted. Then Su Ruhua surprised everyone by asking about Liu Huijin's age. My father said about 27. Her heart started racing. She was almost certain this was the man she'd seen on TV in her past life, someone who became incredibly powerful. She actually asked if she could go on the blind date with him instead, saying she didn't mind raising someone else's child. My father spat his porridge right onto her face. He couldn't believe she'd suggest that when she was already with He Tsung-hao. He refused. It would look terrible for a young girl to volunteer to be a stepmother. Su Ruhua shot back, asking why he'd offer good matches to me, but never to her. The argument distracted my father from coming to beat me, and he went off to nap instead. Lying in my room after eating, I went through the plot in my head. It was the summer of 1974. In the original story's first timeline, the original Nian married He Tsung-hao and got a job as a department store clerk, avoiding being sent to the countryside. In the second timeline after Su Ruhua's rebirth, the original Nian was pushed into marrying Li Chong to avoid going rural, and ended up childless and beaten until she died. Now this version of me had impulsively dropped out of school, making being sent to the countryside an urgent threat. Marriage really was my only way out. Then it hit me, Liu Huijin. I suddenly remembered where I'd heard that name. He becomes a major power player later in the novel. Even Su Ruhua, the heroine, had to rely on connections to him when doing business. And the connection she used? The very marriage arrangement that was originally meant for me. So not only was the original Nian cannon fodder, she was also a stepping stone for the heroine. I shamelessly got excited. I imagined Su Ruhua coming to butter up my husband in the future, and me clinging to his arms sweetly saying, "Don't help her." The thought was delicious. Since I'd been dropped into the role of the villain, I might as well play it right and get revenge for the original Nian. Of course, I completely forgot that just minutes ago I'd said marrying a divorced man was a terrible deal. But I'm picky about looks. That's a lesson I learned from my real life with Xingyan. So I needed to see Liu Huijin's face first. I jumped out of bed and knocked on my father's door. "Dad, I want to go on a blind date." From her little balcony room, Su Ruhua's ears perked up in panic. She was terrified I'd changed my mind about Liu Huijin. She grudgingly admitted that in both lives, I was far prettier than her. If I seriously tried to win someone over, no man could resist. My stepmother tried to send me away, saying my father was sleeping. She had her own agenda. She wanted time to push the Li Chong match since my father had shown interest. But I kept banging on the door until my father sat up, annoyed. He tried to talk me out of it, saying Li Chong was the better choice. I could tell he preferred Li Chong because the factory director's family could directly benefit his career, while Liu Huijin would be stationed far away and useless to him. He finally agreed I could meet Liu Huijin, but only if I also went on a date with Li Chong. I flat out refused. Li Chong lived right in our compound. A failed blind date would be humiliating. Besides, I told my father, the man looks like a giant black bear who could kill me with one punch. Why would I volunteer for that? My father came out from behind the curtain, arguing that Li Chong's size was manly and that Liu Huijin would be even bigger. Su Ruhua chimed in, saying I'd just be a stepmother with Liu Huijin and would be better off with Li Chong. I shot back at my father that soldiers are honorable people who'd never hit their wives, and warned him not to say such things outside, or he could get in trouble. Then I told Su Ruhua that her trying to stop me from meeting Liu Huijin only made me want to do it more, just to annoy her. I noticed her face was still red and swollen from the slaps I gave her. She'd been covering up since her rebirth, keeping herself wrapped up and getting paler. When I stared at her face, she got nervous and asked what I was looking at. I just smiled and said I admired whoever gave her the name Ruhua, which literally means like a flower. She turned pale with anger, knowing I was mocking her. After my father agreed to arrange the meeting, I went back to my room. He was so rattled he couldn't nap anymore, and just went back to work. In my room, I grabbed a small mirror to see what I looked like. My face was about 70 to 80% similar to my appearance in my previous life, just not as fair-skinned. But my eyes were gorgeous, big, dark, and dewy like black grapes with slightly upturned corners. My hair was black and shiny but a bit rough from poor nutrition. I had a long swan-like neck without a single wrinkle, a figure that was clearly attractive even under my plain clothes, and a tiny waist. In this era, this kind of beauty was both a weapon and a liability. I understood now why men in the compound used to secretly watch the original Nian, yet no one dared propose. Her looks were the type that men love but mothers-in-law hate, and her bad reputation made it worse. But I didn't care. I loved how I looked. Then I wondered, as someone who transmigrated by slipping on something disgusting, did I get any cheap powers? A magical space? Spirit spring water? I wasn't picky. The moment I thought about it, I was transported into a brand new space. My heart was pounding. Before me lay plots of rich, dark fertile soil, so black it practically glistened. I grabbed a handful. It was soft and loose, like it had already been tilled. In the distance was a clear stream with no fish. Nearby was a small spring surrounded by emerald jade, glowing beautifully. The spring water collected in a jade cup. I picked it up but didn't dare drink it, and noticed the spring stopped flowing once I lifted the cup. I left the space with the jade cup in hand and found myself back exactly where I'd been. I needed to test the water but couldn't use it on a person, so I looked around and found the only other living thing in the house, a chicken. My stepmother had bought it for her son's birthday tomorrow. The poor thing was barely alive in its cage. I poured a little spirit spring water into its feed. At first the chicken didn't move, but then it slowly turned its head and started eating, slowly at first, then faster and faster until it finished everything. Its eyes were bright and alert. I gave it more scraps with spring water, and it ate those too. Then, as if to thank me, the chicken sat down and laid an egg. Then another. Then a third. This water had brought a half-dead chicken back to life and made it lay 3 eggs. The chicken started clucking loudly after laying the last egg, so I quickly grabbed 2 of the 3 eggs and stored them in my space. Sure enough, my stepmother appeared at the door moments later, asking why the chicken was making noise. She checked on it and was stunned. The chicken she'd been told was past its egg-laying days was now lively and had produced an egg. She thought she'd gotten lucky with her purchase. Then she looked up, saw me watching, and blurted out without thinking, "Do you want to eat it?" The moment my stepmother blurted out, "Do you want to eat it?" she looked like she wanted to bite her own tongue off. But it was too late. I reached into the cage, grabbed the last egg, and walked off with it. She twitched but said nothing, clearly regretting her words. 1 egg lost for nothing. I fired up the stove using the original Nyanyan's memories, boiled all 3 eggs, including the 2 I'd stored in my space, and peeled them after a cold water bath. The smooth whites and sandy yolks were the most delicious thing I'd ever tasted. My stepbrother Yaozi came sniffing around, calling me sis, all sweet when he wanted something. I knew my stepmother had sent him. I threatened to go eat the snacks he had hidden in his room, and he bolted away in a panic to check on his precious walnut cookies. Crisis averted, eggs devoured. Back in my room with the mirror, I assessed myself again. The features were great, but the skin was rough and dark. Still, for 1974, I was stunning by normal standards. Since the chicken survived the spirit spring water, I decided it was safe to try it myself. I took the jade cup to the stream inside my space, ready to jump in if my body started oozing black gunk like in those novels. I'd rather drown than stink to death. I took a sip, slightly sweet, then drank the whole cup. My body felt warm and comfortable, no pain, no black water. Feeling bold, I drank several more cups until I was full. I lay down on the ground in my space, enjoying a cool breeze under a blue sky. It was much more comfortable than the hot world outside. Then I felt something sliding down my face. I rubbed it and pulled off a strip of black grime. I looked down. My arms and legs were seeping dark gunk everywhere. I screamed, stripped off my clothes, and jumped into the stream. Turns out it was only waist deep. After scrubbing off all the filth, I felt 2 pounds lighter. My skin underneath was snow white and smooth all over. This body was genuinely beautiful. I put on a faded light blue dress from the original Nyanyan's wardrobe. Now I had 2 urgent priorities: leave this family and fill my stomach. Looking at that rich black soil, I knew the space was the key. Back in the real world, I went to the kitchen to get some grain, but my stepmother had locked the food cabinet. No problem. In my previous life, I'd watched enough lockpicking videos online. I pulled a hairpin from my head, twisted it in the lock, and popped it open. I took just a small handful of rice, a little millet, and some mung beans, nothing that would be noticed. I planted them in separate plots in my space and watered everything except the mung beans with spirit spring water. I couldn't rely on the Lu Huijin blind date alone. If it didn't work out, my father would force me to marry Li Chong, using the threat of being sent to the countryside. I was technically unemployed now. If someone from the neighborhood committee noticed, I could be shipped off to the countryside the very next day. Surviving 3 years of rural hardship until college entrance exams resumed was too risky. I needed a backup plan and fast. Our compound had a famous matchmaker, Auntie Lu, whose one weakness was good food. And cooking happened to be my strongest skill from my previous life. As a broke office worker, I taught myself to cook rather than waste money on restaurant food, and I'd gotten really good, even pastries and desserts. I grabbed the original Nian savings and headed to the supply store. I'd hoped to buy pork belly for braised meat, but the good cuts were long gone by afternoon. I settled for lean pork, glass noodles, fine white flour, wheat seeds, and seasonings. I'd make pork and noodle stuffed buns instead. Back home, I tossed the wheat seeds into my space with some Spirit spring water, then got to work, kneading dough, letting it rise, mixing the filling with extra oil for richness, and frying the glass noodles crispy before crumbling them into the meat mixture. When I checked my space, the seeds I'd planted earlier had already sprouted 10 centimeters. The Spirit spring water's growth power was incredible. I hurried back to my space and poured several more cups of Spirit spring water on the rice and millet before heading out to finish the buns. My fingers moved quickly, shaping the dough and wrapping the filling. I made 10 big meat buns and got them steaming. Soon the whole kitchen smelled incredible. I could hear the neighbors talking through the walls. Who's cooking meat? It smells amazing, and why couldn't they wait until dinner, so I could at least eat my rice while smelling it? When the buns were done, they were white, plump, and beautiful. I couldn't wait. I grabbed one, blew on it, and bit right in. The skin was thin, the filling was thick and juicy, and the oil had soaked into the dough. It was the first meat I'd eaten since arriving in this world, and my whole body relaxed. One bun and my belly smoothed out all the panic of being in a strange time. I had a magical space now and food to grow. At least I wouldn't end up as miserable as the original Nian. I kept 3 buns in my space, wrapped the remaining 6 in oil paper. 2 per bundle, making 3 packages, cleaned the kitchen, opened the windows to air out the smell, and headed to the matchmaker's house. Auntie Lou was sitting outside her door fanning herself. When she saw me, she didn't even recognize me at first. She'd been a matchmaker for over 20 years with more than 100 successful matches, and she said she'd never seen anyone this pretty. Rosy cheeks, a neat high ponytail, big dewy eyes, and a crisp, pleasant voice. When I told her I was Su Nian, Su Aigwa's second daughter, she finally placed me, but her face dropped. She'd heard about the drama with Heat Song-hao and my stepsister. Her reputation depended on being selective, and she wasn't about to risk it on a girl who might still be hung up on an ex. But then she caught a whiff of the meat buns in my hand. She swallowed hard and tried to stay composed, saying she couldn't accept gifts without reason. I pushed the buns into her hands with my sweetest smile and told her I wanted to find a husband. She asked if my family knew I was here. I was the first young woman who'd ever come to her door directly. I assured her I was serious about marriage, just doing this myself, because my parents were busy with work. She didn't fully believe me, but kept talking. She said with my looks, if it weren't for the Heat Song-hao scandal, I could pick any man I wanted. Then she asked what I was looking for. I listed my requirements: at least 175 centimeters tall, good character, a permanent job, able to marry within 2 months, preferably good-looking, and no complicated family dynamics. Auntie Lou looked like she wanted to throw the buns back at me. Before she could refuse, I pulled out a handful of crystal-clear rice from my bag, grown in my space. When I'd left the house, I discovered the rice had already matured and could be harvested just by thinking about it. The grains were spotless, with a gentle fragrance, nothing like the regular rice full of small stones and grit. I told her if she found me a match, I'd give her 2 whole jin of this rice. Her eyes went wide. She put aside her hesitation and really looked at me, young, beautiful, capable of cooking meat buns from scratch, decisive, and clearly not the lazy, unreasonable girl the rumors described. My requirements suddenly seemed more reasonable. She asked for photo. The original Nian had an ID photo, not as lively as the real thing, but good enough. Auntie Lou patted her chest confidently, her expression finally warming up. Don't worry, I know you're in a hurry. I'll find someone as fast as I can. After I left, Auntie Lou opened the oil paper and bit into one of the buns while they were still warm. Her eyes lit up. She knew she'd made the right call keeping them. Back home, I went straight into my space. I was obsessed with it now. I realized the original Nian barely had any clothes, and I'd need something decent for blind dates. I counted her savings, just 18 yuan. I didn't even know how much a good outfit cost at the department store. At least it was summer, so clothes would be cheaper than winter ones. I cooked a bowl of my space-grown rice with triple the water to make porridge, then went back to the space to keep watering and harvesting. When I came out and opened the pot, the smell was incredible, thick, sweet, and fragrant. Every grain was plump, and the broth was sticky. The noon porridge I'd eaten was maybe a third as good, and had gritty bits in it. This was on a completely different level. That evening, Auntie Lou's family discovered just how special my food was. She split the remaining 5 buns among her household of 10, half a bun each. Her second son took one bite and practically shouted about how amazing it was. He could tell it was made with fine flour. Then she had them try the rice porridge, and everyone was stunned again. The grains held their shape even after long cooking and had a wonderful chew. Her youngest son, who was 19, got excited and asked what I looked like, hoping maybe he could marry me himself. Auntie Lou shut him down fast. I required someone at least 175 centimeters, and he was only 170. But she told the whole family I was the prettiest girl she'd ever seen, like a fairy, and asked them to keep an eye out for suitable young men among their co-workers. She mentioned there'd be 2 more jin of that special rice as a reward if the match succeeded. That got everyone motivated. The youngest son went quiet, staring into his bowl. He couldn't help his height. That was his parents' fault, though he'd never dare say it out loud. The second son felt a bit better knowing that even if he'd been born at the right time, he still wouldn't have qualified. Meanwhile, I ate my porridge and another meat bun from the space. I was delighted to find the bun was exactly the same temperature as when I'd put it in. The space could preserve food perfectly. I patted my full belly and stretched. My first day in this era had gone well. I'd fed myself, found a magical space, and set plans in motion. A new life had begun. When my stepmother came home that evening, things weren't so cheerful for her. She kept smelling meat in the house, but couldn't figure out where it came from. The kitchen looked untouched, none of the seasonings were missing, and the lock on the food cabinet showed no signs of tampering, even sitting the same way she'd left it. She opened it with her key, and thought the grain looked a little less than before, but the lock only had 1 key, and it was on her, so nothing could be missing. Right? She placed a single strand of her own hair on top of the lock as a trap before starting dinner. At least after my scene at lunch, she made sure to cook enough for me this time. When my father got home, he scolded her for cooking instead of making me do it. I'd been home all day doing nothing. My stepmother gently defended me, saying I'd be married off soon enough and might as well enjoy these last few days. Then she casually brought up seeing the factory director's wife carrying 2 jin of meat and a pack of cigarettes, and how the wife had tried to give her some meat. She praised how well off their family was, a not-so-subtle push for the Lee Chong match. My father nodded thoughtfully. He'd heard rumors at work that salaries might be adjusted soon, and his boss was about to leave, which meant a promotion slot was opening up. The next morning, I woke up to find my space had already produced a full bag of rice, 2 bags of flour, and a bag of millet. The space responded to my thoughts. I just had to think, harvest, and the wheat would cut itself, then thresh, and the grains separated, then grind, and the wheat turned into flour right before my eyes, landing neatly in sturdy cloth bags that appeared out of nowhere. Even the bags were high quality. In this era, people would buy fabric bags just to sew them into pants. I estimated I had about 20 jin of rice, 15 jin of millet, and 40 jin of flour. The rice and millet looked too perfect, so I mixed in some stalks and bits from the harvest to make them look more natural. I found an old basket at home, tossed it into my space, washed up, and headed out without even eating breakfast. The original Nyen Nyen had been to the black market a few times, so I knew the way. Near the entrance, I ducked into my space to disguise myself. Old clothes, dirt smeared on my face, a headscarf over my hair. I gave the password to the 2 men at the entrance, paid the 5 entry fee, and slipped in with my basket of rice. Inside, everyone moved quietly, no shouting, no calling out. You just crouched down and showed your goods, hoping someone with sharp eyes would spot them. I pulled back the cover on my basket to reveal the white rice. Sure enough, a well-dressed, middle-aged woman in leather shoes noticed immediately. She had 3 sons and a daughter, all big eaters, and even with 2 working parents, they never had enough grain rations. She touched and smelled the rice, then decided on the spot to buy it all.
I kłótec ten fen parjin.
She winced. The supply store sold rice at 12 fun, but I pointed out that the store required grain coupons and my rice was better quality. She agreed. I borrowed a scale from a nearby vendor in exchange for a handful of my golden millet and weighed out 20 jin and 5 liang. I rounded down and asked for 3 yuan 7, throwing in the cloth bag for free. She paid immediately and carried it off. Others who'd gathered around asked when I'd be back, but I couldn't promise anything. Before leaving, the woman, Wang Shun, as she introduced herself, asked if I had more. I told her I had 15 jin of millet and 40 jin of flour, but needed to go get them. She gave me her address at the steel factory compound, Building 18, Unit 203, and told me to come without the disguise, just say I was her distant relative. She seemed like a good judge of character. I quoted the same price for everything, 18 fin per jin, flat rate. She agreed, without haggling. The millet would be good for her husband's weak stomach, and she could share some with her in-laws. I loaded up the basket in my space and found her place easily. The guard at the gate barely glanced at me. Wang Xin welcomed me in and handed me a single 10-yuan bill, a great unity note. She weighed everything, confirmed the quality, and we agreed I'd come to her first whenever I had more grain to sell. After she left, I did the math and sighed. In the novels I'd read, transmigrated characters made hundreds of yuan in a single sale. I'd spent a whole morning and earned just over 10 yuan. Me was where the real money was. I'd need to buy some chicks and raise them in my space. Still, this was my first real earnings. Combined with the original Nian savings, I now had over 30 yuan, enough to finally buy a nice outfit. I walked for what felt like forever until I reached the city's biggest department store. I'd heard that sales clerks at the department store judged you by your clothes, so before going in I ducked into my space, washed the dirt off my face, changed into clean clothes, and tied my hair in a high ponytail. No point in shopping if I was going to be looked down on. The department store was 4 stories tall and very impressive for this era. Most shoppers were either well-off families or young couples buying things for their weddings, so it wasn't crowded. Women's clothing was on the 2nd floor, and despite most people in this era wearing only gray, black, and white, the store actually had a decent selection. I even spotted wide-leg pants tucked away in a corner, ahead of their time. I was drawn to a denim-colored dress displayed near the entrance. It had a slight cinch at the waist, which set it apart from all the shapeless options. I was about to ask the clerk to take it down so I could hold it up to a mirror when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Songhao, look at that dress. I really like it." It was Su Ruhua and she was with Yi Songhao. My interest in the dress evaporated instantly. I turned to leave, but Su Ruhua grabbed me, putting on her sweet act. "Nian Nian, you won't even talk to your sister anymore?" I clenched my fists and turned around. Yi Songhao looked at me with complicated eyes. I could tell from his expression that he'd once genuinely liked the original Nian Nian, but his mother had poisoned his mind over time, saying I had a seductive look, narrow hips that couldn't bear sons, and wasn't the hardworking type. Eventually, Su Ruhua had slipped into the gap. Now, seeing me again after months, he seemed struck by how much prettier I'd become. His fist tightened at his side. Su Ruhua noticed my transformation too, somehow thinner, paler, more refined after the hunger strike. She tried to show off, saying Yi Songhao had insisted on buying her clothes. I fired back. "Is the family too poor to buy you clothes? You're not even married, and you're already asking a man for things. Wait till I get home and ask how they raised you." That threw her off completely. She'd been trying to make me jealous, and instead I'd put her in an awkward position. Yi Songhao had been wanting to formally visit her family to settle things, and she'd been stalling. Now I'd backed her into a corner. She lowered her head and played the delicate victim. "It's all my fault. But please keep your voice down, you're bothering people." I waved my hand in front of my nose and said, "Ugh, it stinks, sis. How many days since you brushed your teeth?" She panicked and breathed into her palm to check. Toothpaste cost a whole yuan per tube, and hers had run out. She'd only rinsed with salt water that morning. When she looked up and saw me grinning, she realized I'd been messing with her. She snapped and swung at me, blurting out, "You dare mess with me? accidentally using crude language from her past life that didn't match her gentle persona at all. I caught her hand easily. I'd eaten a meat bun on the way and had plenty of strength. While she was panicking about her slip-up and glancing nervously at Hee Seung-hao, I pushed her away and said sweetly, "Go on, keep playing your elegant, gracious character. Don't forget how you used to hit me when nobody was home." Then I rolled up my sleeve to show a red, swollen mark on my arm. It looked alarming. Before anyone could respond, I walked away. I didn't care whether Hee Seung-hao believed me. I just wanted to plant a seed of doubt that might prove useful someday. Behind me, Su Ruhua lost her composure completely. She shouted that she'd never hit me, but her voice was sharp and her face twisted. Nothing like the gentle image she'd been cultivating. Hee Seung-hao looked at her with a complicated expression. He'd grown up with the original Nian Nian and deep down believed she wasn't a liar, even if she'd become difficult. For the first time, he wondered if he'd been too trusting of Su Ruhua. Their date ended on a sour note. Meanwhile, I kept shopping happily. The quality here really was excellent. I finally settled on Blajai, a style of dress with delicate ruffled collar and sleeve details in a vintage, retro color. I wished I could curl my hair into big waves to match, but the times wouldn't allow it. Then I asked the price, 20 yuan. That was an entire month's salary for an ordinary worker. Buying nice clothes in this era was painful. I gritted my teeth and handed over 20 yuan for the dress. Then I understood why people in the modern world buy a luxury bag and suddenly need matching shoes and clothes. Looking at my beautiful new dress, I couldn't stand my dusty old shoes. But I only had 10 yuan left. Leather shoes were out of the question. I settled on a pair of white canvas shoes for 9 yuan, then spent the last bit on a jean of meat. My pockets were practically empty. Back home, I walked in to find Su Ruhua crying in her mother's arms and my father sitting at his desk looking furious. He immediately demanded to know when Su Ruhua had ever hit me. He'd only ever seen me hitting her. I just grinned and played dumb, saying I'd only smelled something bad and she'd taken it personally. Then I changed the subject with a question that hit much harder. "Dad, where's the money my mother said she left for me?" He froze. His voice stuttered as he denied knowing about any money, claiming ties with my mother's family were cut long ago. But I could see right through him. From reading the novel, I knew that after the economic reforms, my father gave the male and female leads a box of gold bars. Coming from a family of poor farmers for 3 generations, there's no way that gold was his. It had to be my birth mother's inheritance, stolen and handed to someone else. Another thing the original Nian Nian lost. I smiled knowingly and didn't press further. My father got visibly nervous, his fingers trembling. His guilt made him completely forget about punishing me for the department store incident. He quickly changed the subject, saying he'd already sent a telegram to Lu Huijin's side and was waiting for a reply. Just like that, Su Ruhua's complaint was buried. Meanwhile, my stepmother was quietly calculating. She'd noticed my father's lying face and was now wondering if there really was hidden money. She'd been married to him for years without seeing any extra wealth. She decided she'd outlast him and get it for her son eventually. That evening in my space, I bathed in the cool stream and discovered something new, a white jade bracelet sitting beneath the jade cup near the spirit spring. It was flawless, smooth, and fit my wrist perfectly. The moment I put it on, it began to glow, pulsing light and dark, then vanished completely into my skin. A little unsettling, but after transmigrating by slipping on something gross, nothing surprised me anymore. That night, my father couldn't sleep, torn between guilt over my birth mother and fear that I might know about the hidden wealth. My stepmother lay beside him, seething quietly, vowing the money would eventually go to her son. On Monday morning, my father received a phone call at his office from Lu Huijin's military district. The voice on the other end was polite but distant, setting the blind date for July 16th at noon at the state-run restaurant. The whole conversation was over in a few sentences. At lunch, my father told my stepmother to pass along the date to me. I wasn't home again. Su Ruhua's knuckles turned white gripping her bowl when she heard the news. My stepmother cleverly dodged responsibility, telling my father to tell me himself. He slammed his chopsticks down, grumbling about how I was always giving him attitude. After he left for work, Su Ruhua grabbed her mother's arm and volunteered to be the one to tell me about the blind date. Her mother agreed. As for where I'd been, I was out selling grain again. Having empty pockets gave me terrible anxiety, a leftover habit from my previous life. I'd accumulated another day's worth of harvest from my space and headed back to Wang Shen's place at the steel factory compound. When she saw me with my big basket, her eyes lit up and she pulled me straight inside, this time into the bedroom since her husband and sons were sitting in the living room. Auntie Lu could tell from my expression that I was interested in the candidates she'd found. She set the dates right away. I'd meet Xie Yang on the 15th at noon and Gu Yuan on the 17th at noon, with 2 days in between to think it over. If I hit it off with Xie Yang, I could just come tell her. Auntie Lu loved seeing her matches turn into real couples, though I could tell she was also dreaming about that promised rice. I agreed without hesitation and headed home feeling light on my feet. Those meat buns had been a solid investment. Meanwhile, Su Ruhua was panicking about my blind date with Lu Huijin. She was so distracted she couldn't focus in class all afternoon. After school, she went straight to find Li Chong, the violent factory director's son she'd been married to in her past life. She found him leaning against a wall chewing on a foxtail grass stem. Even after being reborn, she still flinched when he raised his hand. She told him I was actively looking for a husband and that his mother had already asked about me. She suggested they meet at the state-run restaurant to keep things respectable. Li Chong perked up immediately. He'd always thought I was attractive and didn't care about the rumors that I was lazy or too curvy to be a proper wife. His interest was purely physical. Su Ruhua fed him information about my preferences from her past life, that I liked Balaji dresses, sweet talk, and sparkly jewelry. Li Chong agreed but said the 15th at noon didn't work. He had another blind date then. He suggested 5 in the afternoon instead. He went back to daydreaming, not noticing Su Ruhua's trembling hands. She dug her nails into her palms until they bled. Setting up the man who'd beaten her to death in her last life to meet her stepsister made her feel ice cold even in the summer heat. Back home, Su Ruhua knocked on my door. When I finally opened it, she told me my father said the blind date with Lu Huijin was on the 15th at 5 in the afternoon, and that I'd meet Li Chong on the 16th. She deliberately swapped the times and dates. I didn't trust her for a second, but I slammed the door in her face without responding. I'd been annoyed because things I'd bought at the black market had disappeared inside my space, and I took my frustration out on her. Back in the space, I planted the ginseng slices and small ginseng roots I'd bought near the spirit spring where the soil was moistest. Then I noticed a packet of seeds on the ground labeled apple. I realized what had happened. My space converts jewelry and jade into seeds. The items I couldn't find earlier had been transformed. I quickly planted the apple seeds and made a wish out loud. Next time, strawberries, cherries, or mangosteens would be great. Apples were a bit hard for my taste, but they were valuable currency. In this era, when my father came home, he was in a great mood. His boss was being transferred next month, and people had been flattering him all day about possibly getting the promotion. He even opened his prized Mao Tai liquor for a small drink. At dinner, I loudly asked my father to confirm, was my blind date with Lu Huijin on the 15th? Su Ruhua's heart jumped to her throat. But my father, a bit tipsy, just said yes and scolded me for going out too much. She breathed a huge sigh of relief. He'd confirmed the wrong date without realizing it. That night, Su Ruhua picked out her best dress, planning to show up on the 16th to meet Lu Huijin herself, pretending to be the granddaughter from the arranged match. She figured he hadn't seen me in years and wouldn't know the difference. She'd leave Li Chong for me. She fell asleep smiling. Over the next 2 days, I watched my apple seedlings grow in the space and accumulated more grain. This time, instead of selling grain for cash, I traded it at the black market for jewelry, jade bracelets, and gold necklaces. Back home, I brought them into my space and watched in amazement as they slowly dissolved and disappeared before my eyes, confirming my theory. My space could absorb precious stones and metals and convert them into seeds. Sure enough, new seed packets appeared in my space. Strawberry, cherry, and mangosteen, exactly what I'd wished for. I carefully planted each one in the black soil and watered them with spirit spring water. I also fed my chicken some space-grown millet. The chicken was growing noticeably faster inside the space than it would outside. That night, I dreamed of sitting on a mountain of mangosteens with strawberries in one arm and cherries in the other. I woke up with drool on my pillow. Today was the 15th. I jumped out of bed, washed up, bathed in my space, and put on my new outfit. I styled my hair in a cute bun. My strategy was to look so good that I'd be the one doing the rejecting, never the other way around. In the mirror, I looked great. A straight nose, naturally red lips, 2 little dimples when I smiled, the reddish-brown dress, and my white canvas shoes. I ate a bun for my space, brushed my teeth, and headed out. Everyone had already left the house. On the bus, my red dress stood out like a beacon among all the gray and drab clothing. Young men kept staring, some wanting to approach, but I kept my eyes closed the entire ride. They didn't dare wake me. When the conductor called my stop, I leaped off the bus, leaving a trail of sighing young men behind. The bus had been suffocating, foot odor, poultry smell, and gasoline fumes all mixed together. I arrived early, so I browsed the nearby department store to settle my stomach from the ride. Then I walked into the state-run restaurant. It was busy. Someone was having a wedding banquet across several tables. I scanned the room and locked eyes with a man in a military uniform. That was my blind date, Sia-young. He waved me over. He had the kind of square-jawed, honest face that mothers-in-law in this era loved. His back was straight, and he politely poured me tea as I sat down. He introduced himself first, making sure he had the right person. He told me he was 26, had been in the army for 10 years, and was the youngest child with 3 older sisters who were all married and working. That last detail set off alarm bells. 3 daughters before finally getting a son screamed of a family obsessed with having boys. In this era, nobody called it sexism, but I knew better. If I married into that family and kept having daughters, they want me to keep going until I'd produced a whole football team. I got goosebumps just thinking about it. I asked why he was still unmarried at his age, since many soldiers his age already had children. He froze for a second, then gave a rehearsed answer about being too busy with work. I caught the hesitation. Clearly the real reason was that he'd had zero interest in marriage until now, and had only come because his aunt and parents pressured him. His ears turned a bit red when our eyes met, and I could tell he was more interested than he'd planned to be. But I wasn't feeling any spark on my end. Since I wasn't excited about him, I ordered only vegetable dishes when it was time to eat. No point spending money. But Sia-young noticed and added several meat dishes to the order. I clutched the few yuan left in my pocket, hoping I could still afford to split the bill. Meanwhile, I had no idea that Li Chong had also walked into the restaurant. He'd spotted me from across the room the moment he came in, watching me chat with another man for 2 minutes. He was struck by how much prettier I'd become lately, so much so that the woman sitting across from him at his own blind date suddenly looked even less appealing by comparison. Li Chong couldn't stand seeing me with another man. He abandoned his own blind date across the room and marched straight over to my table, acting like we were old friends. Nian, what are you doing here? I recognized him from the original Nian's memories and told him I was just eating with a friend. He sized up Sia-young in his military uniform, figured out he was also a blind date candidate, and got annoyed that he'd been ranked behind someone else. Then he sat himself down uninvited and announced, "Since you're already here, we don't need to meet tonight. Let's just do our blind date now." I stared at him in disbelief. The audacity of this man was unreal. He said it with such a straight face that anyone listening would think I'd actually agreed to meet him. I lost my composure and let him have it. Even if every man on earth died, I wouldn't go on a blind date with you. Li Chong had never been humiliated like this, especially in front of another man. I could see his fists clench. For a split second he wanted to hit me, but I wasn't his wife yet, so he couldn't. He tried a different angle, turning to Sia-young and saying, "She's my woman. My dad's the factory director." Back off. Sia-young's expression shifted from pleasant to stone cold. He was a man who'd been in real combat, and when his eyes went hard, they were genuinely frightening. Li Chong flinched, but then laughed, knowing a soldier in uniform couldn't hit a civilian. I grabbed the teapot and poured it over Li Chang's head. Are you awake now? Who told you I agreed to this? He wiped his face and said, your sister told me. That confirmed it. Su Ruhua had set this whole thing up. Li Chang grabbed Xia Yang's teacup to throw water back at me, but Xia Yang caught his wrist in an iron grip. Li Chang started screaming horrible things about me, calling me names. People around us began whispering and staring. In this era, a beautiful woman involved in any kind of drama was automatically assumed to be in the wrong. Xia Yang clamped his other hand over Li Chang's mouth while I kept yelling at Li Chang, telling him he was an idiot for trusting Su Ruhua, a woman who'd seduced her own sister's boyfriend. The commotion drew attention from a wedding banquet happening nearby. A woman at one of those tables kicked the man sitting next to her, a man who was focused on eating, and said, "Stop eating. Look over there. Isn't that your Nian Nian?" The man's chopstick stopped. His name was Lu Huijin. His mother had recognized me. They hadn't seen me in 7 or 8 years. He straightened his clothes and walked over. As he approached, he heard me in full fury, cursing out Li Chang with impressive force. Then Li Chang tried to kick the table. Before his foot connected, a shadow flashed past, and Li Chang was slammed face down onto the table. I went completely silent. The man who'd appeared was strikingly handsome, sharp eyebrows, bright eyes, wearing plain clothes but radiating an aura of authority and refinement. Even his jawline looked aristocratic. He was exactly my type. Xia Yang stepped aside and saluted him. "Thank you, Commander Lu." My heart skipped a beat. "Commander
Lu
Huijin?" Then Xia Yang made it worse by introducing us. "This is Commander Lu. And this is Su Nian Nian, my friend." I could only manage an awkward smile. "What a coincidence." Lu Huijin replied coolly. "Indeed. Let me go take care of him." He grabbed Li Chang like a puppy and carried him outside. Xia Yang and I tried to follow, but a waiter stopped us. The food had been ordered, paid for, and was now being served.
Naughty fans.
In seconds, the whole table was covered with dishes. I sat there fidgeting nervously and asked Xia Yang, "What does take care of him mean exactly?" For a terrifying moment I wondered if take care of him meant Lu Huijin was going to kill Li Chang. Xia Yang read my face and laughed. Commander Lu wouldn't kill an innocent person. He'd just make sure Li Chang wouldn't come after me for revenge. Xia Yang asked if I knew Lu Huijin. I felt a pang of guilt. Not only did I know him, we had an arranged marriage from childhood.
I didn't say that though.
He pushed the braised pork toward me, telling me to eat more because I looked too thin, and gently asked if my sister treated me badly. I shook my head. No matter how awful my family was, I never complain about them to a man. Sweet talk during good times could easily become ammunition during fights. Then Lu Huijin came back and sat down right next to Xia Yang, across from me. His gaze made my heart flutter. He asked directly, "You're here on a blind date with Xia Yang?" I nodded stiffly and tried to redirect. "Our blind date is tomorrow afternoon, right?" He smiled slightly. "Not bad. You haven't forgotten. But it's tomorrow at noon, not afternoon." So Su Ruhua had lied about the time too. Then he added, "Actually, I don't think we need to wait until tomorrow." My heart sank. Had he already written me off after seeing me on a date with someone else? I felt like a wife caught cheating, which was ridiculous. In the modern world, going on multiple blind dates was perfectly normal. But staring at his handsome face, I couldn't get the words out. He looked at me for what felt like forever, then said in that deep voice, "Let's just do our date now too." I hesitated, saying this meal was Xia Yang's treat, and it might be rude. Lu Huijin launched straight into his introduction. 26 years old, regiment commander, earning 108 yuan per month plus bonuses for missions. Single, but he'd be raising 2 children, his late brother's sons, aged 4 and 3. His older brother had been a soldier who died in battle, and the children's mother passed away from grief not long after. His expression turned serious as he explained this. I was quiet for a moment. From the novel, I only knew that Lu Huijin devoted his entire life to the country and died without children of his own. The book never mentioned nephews or a brother's sacrifice, probably because it was too minor a detail for a side character's storyline. Drawing on my internet forum wisdom about in-law problems, I asked whether we'd live with his parents. He said his rank was high enough to get military family housing. I could bring the two children and live with him on base, away from his parents. Poor Xie Yang returned with rice after waiting in a long line, only for Lu Huijin to hand him 2 10 yuan bills, say he wouldn't be eating, and tell him to enjoy the meal, his treat. Xie Yang was touched by his commander's generosity for about 2 seconds before Lu Huijin turned to me and said, "Come find me over there when you're done. I'll take you home." The light died in Xie Yang's eyes. When Lu Huijin walked away, Xie Yang asked what was going on between us. I admitted we'd known each other before and had already arranged a blind date for tomorrow, but ran into each other today by chance. Xie Yang looked at the money in his hand and understood. He'd been eliminated. He muttered that the sweet and sour fish must have had too much vinegar because everything tasted sour, weak, and pointless. I was secretly relieved I didn't have to pay for the meal. I'd lost my appetite anyway, while Xie Yang stress ate the entire table clean. The man's stomach was impressive. As we got up to leave, Xie Yang asked if we could see each other again. I told him he was a good person, but we were better off as friends. Lu Huijin met us at the door. Xie Yang said a heavy goodbye and walked off with slow, dejected steps. Outside, the summer heat hit us like a wall. Lu Huijin suggested we go browse the department store next door, where it was cooler. I was pleasantly surprised. He was already willing to spend money on the first meeting. Inside, he continued telling me about his family. He was the third of 4 siblings, an older brother who died in combat, a married older sister, and a younger sister. After his brother's wife passed away from grief, his parents had been raising the 2 boys, but soon they wouldn't be able to continue for reasons he'd explain later. I had no problem raising a martyr's children. I deeply respect those who sacrificed for the country. But I wanted to be upfront about my own situation too. I told Lu Huijin I'd only finished through 11th grade and had no job. My only condition for marriage was that he not interfere with my life decisions, like if I wanted to go back to school or work in the future. And most importantly, his salary had to be handed over to me. I wasn't going to raise 2 children for free like some unpaid nanny. He agreed to everything without hesitation. His one request was that we wait a year before having our own children, to give the boys time to adjust. He didn't smoke, rarely drank, and had no expenses on base, so handing over his paycheck was fine by him. I happily agreed to the 1-year wait. It gave me time to evaluate the marriage. If things went well, we'd have kids. If not, I'd divorce him once college entrance exams came back and start fresh. Just like that, we were engaged. He said I could tell him whatever I wanted for the bride price. I told him I wanted the money placed directly in my hands on the wedding day, not given to my father. If it went through my father, it would end up saved for precious little Yaozi. I had zero trust in that man. I thought back to the original Nianyan's fate, married off to Li Chong, beaten regularly, coming home covered in bruises only for her family to dismiss her. What man doesn't hit his wife, they'd say. Just be nicer to him. They'd all benefited from her marriage to the factory director's son and weren't about to rock the boat. Eventually, she stopped going home for help and died young. Then her family collected compensation money from Li Chong. Even after death, they squeezed every last drop of value from her. And later, Su Ruhua used the original Nianyan's arranged connection to get close to Lu Huijin for her business. When we left the department store, Lu Huijin offered to drive me home. I'd been a tiny bit disappointed he hadn't bought me anything inside. We'd just gotten engaged after all, but he turned out to be the straightforward type. He'd driven the military jeep, which looked incredibly cool. Riding in it instantly lifted my spirits, and at least I didn't have to smell anyone's feet. At my compound gate, he said he'd tell his family tonight and come see me as early as tomorrow at noon. My marriage had been settled in just a few hours. We'd barely talked for 2. Life really was like a dream. As I turned to leave, he called me back and handed me a roll of cash mixed with ration tickets. I'd thought he was stingy for not shopping, but he'd gone straight to giving me money instead. I loved this man's style. When I asked what it was for, he simply said, "Pocket money." We weren't even married yet, and he was already handing over cash. Very promising.
On my
way home, I stopped at Auntie Lou's house with 2 jean of rice and told her I'd found someone. No need for the date on the 17th. That evening, her whole family ate my rice and rallied behind me. Auntie Lou declared I was a good kid whose terrible reputation was entirely my stepmother's doing. Her family vowed to set the record straight around the neighborhood. I strolled home in a great mood. Some neighborhood aunties complimented my looks along the way, though I overheard them gossiping about my reputation after I passed. At least one of them admitted I didn't seem like the rumors described. I got home around 3, took a refreshing bath in my space, washed my clothes, and napped peacefully. When I woke up, I heard my stepmother in the kitchen, then my father and stepbrother coming home. An hour passed and dinner was ready, but Su Ruhua still hadn't returned. My stepmother asked my father if he should go look for her. He waved it off, broad daylight. What could happen? The words had barely left his mouth when the front door opened. My stepmother rushed over and gasped, "Oh my God, who beat you up?" Su Ruhua limped through the door looking like a disaster. 2 black eyes like a panda and a leg so hurt she could barely walk. She immediately blamed me, crying that she'd try to set me up with a nice man out of the goodness of her heart, and the guy had beaten her up when I didn't show. Li Chong had tracked her down after the restaurant incident and beat her without a word of explanation. She'd been terrified at first, thinking he might be a reborn person too. But after the beating, she realized it was because I told him she was the one who lied about the blind date. I walked right out of my room and called her out. I asked everyone why they never questioned how Li Chong's first wife died. I laid it out plainly. He'd paid the family compensation money, his wife used to wear long sleeves and pants even in summer to cover bruises, and everyone whispered she'd been beaten to death. I looked Su Ruhua dead in the eye and said, "You stole my boyfriend and then tried to hand me off to a wife-beater." Quite the scheme. My father went quiet, remembering that yes, Li Chong's first wife really did dress like that. He looked at Su Ruhua with suspicion. She went pale and collapsed to the floor. My stepmother rushed to her side, crying about how their good intentions were unappreciated, playing the victim as usual. My father almost bought it, reasoning that his 18-year-old stepdaughter couldn't have planned something so devious. I crouched down and slapped Su Ruhua hard across the face. "If you love power so much, go marry Li Chong yourself." She just sat there crying, too beaten down to fight back. My stepmother finally snapped and lunged at me with a vicious expression, dropping her gentle mask for the first time. I quickly tossed a handful of green beans on the floor and stepped back. She slipped on them and fell hard on her backside. My father yelled at her to pick up the beans. He couldn't stand the waste. I watched her crawl around collecting them, wondering if she'd actually cook them after they'd been on the floor. Of course she would. I announced I wasn't eating dinner, then dropped one more. Bomb. "Lu Huijin is coming tomorrow to discuss our marriage." I walked into my room without looking back, leaving Su Ruhua shocked, my father confused, and my stepmother frozen with beans in her hand. In my room, I ate 2 meat buns for my space, made with space-grown flour. They were even better than before, soft and steaming hot as if fresh from the stove. I checked on my chickens, which were nearly big enough to lay eggs, and fed them more spirit spring water. I counted the money Lu Huijin had given me. 10 bills. 100 yuan. I was rich. That night I dreamed about eating pastries. Su Ruhua, meanwhile, lay awake clenching her fists, vowing to stop my marriage to Lu Huijin. She was a reborn person, surely she could outsmart a fool like me. The next morning, while I was still sleeping, Su Ruhua limped straight to the neighborhood committee office and signed me up to be sent to the countryside. The worker noticed her black eyes and asked what happened. She mumbled about walking into something in the dark. The worker didn't press it. They had quotas to fill for sending young people to rural areas, and here was someone volunteering a family member. Normally, they'd take months to find eligible people. When asked where to send me, Su Ruhua's eyes darted around. She knew the Northeast was cold, but the work was easier with fertile land. She wanted me to suffer, so she picked the Northwest instead. Harsher conditions, harder labor. The worker, Yang Guifeng, frowned slightly but wrote it down. She'd go deliver the notice to our house later. Watching Su Ruhua limp away, Yang Guifeng thought to herself that whoever had beaten her hadn't hit hard enough. I woke up to an empty house with no food left for me. as usual. I made myself rice porridge and ate a bun, then headed to the supply store. I went straight to the hardware counter and asked a clerk with braided hair if they had any large iron woks. She looked at me curiously. In all her years selling, she'd never seen a young girl come in to buy a big cooking pot. The supply store clerk was cold at first. She'd never seen a young girl buying a large iron wok. Usually, it was men shopping for weddings. I told her I was about to marry a military man who was too busy to come himself, and her whole attitude flipped. She felt terrible for being rude to a future military wife and became incredibly helpful, pulling out the last big wok and showing me thermoses, wash basins, and other wedding essentials. Everything had giant red, double happiness, characters, and little fish printed on them. Not exactly my style, but practical. I bought it all. The wok, spatula, bowls, thermoses, basins, a set of wedding porcelain, some canned meat, and a bottle of Moutai liquor. I also grabbed a pack of white rabbit milk candies and fruit hard candies for wedding sweets. My wallet was bleeding, but everything in this era was just expensive. The clerk even gave me a rope to carry things, and I slipped her 2 white rabbit candies as thanks. She was thrilled, convinced that military wives were the most generous people alive. I ducked into a quiet spot, stored everything in my space, changed back into my disguise clothes, and headed to the black market. I needed to build up my cash reserves before following Lu Huijin to the military base, where sharp-eyed soldiers would make black market trips impossible. I even picked up some rocks and a stick along the way for self-defense, tossing them into my space. I'd barely stepped into the black market when someone grabbed me from behind. My heart nearly stopped. Was I caught already? I was about to unleash a kick when I heard a familiar whisper. "I finally found you." It was Wang Xin. She pulled me into a corner and gushed about how amazing my grain was. Her daughter's breast milk had improved, her grandchild was getting plump and healthy, the millet porridge was so thick and fragrant it was curing her husband's stomach problems, and her elderly parents were walking more steadily. The whole extended family, all government workers, had tried the grain and were now clamoring for more. Her status at home had skyrocketed. Even her daughters-in-law were pampering her, doing all the dishes and mopping, just to stay in her good graces and get grain for their own families. She said she'd been living like an empress. She insisted on buying everything in my basket on the spot. I followed her home, where she practically sprinted to get the scale. I weighed it out. 10 jin of millet, 50 jin of flour, 32 jin of rice. She handed me 16 yuan and 60 fin immediately. When I mentioned I'd be leaving the area soon, she looked devastated and grabbed my hands, asking if she could help. I told her I could prepare a larger order. She immediately asked for 200 jin of flour plus extra rice. I agreed, but the quantity was too large for a casual handoff. I told her to meet me at the abandoned guard booth in her compound tomorrow at exactly 9 at night. I'd label everything with weights. She should take the goods, leave the money, and walk away quickly. She was a bit alarmed by how secretive it sounded, but she was smart enough not to ask questions. Anyone who could produce flour this white and rice this good clearly had something unusual going on, and prying would only cause trouble. Knowing this might be her last chance to stock up, she agreed without hesitation. I got home around 10 in the morning to find Su Ruhua sitting on the sofa with her panda eyes, smirking at me. "Let's see how long you stay happy." She clearly had something up her sleeve, but I didn't have time for her nonsense. I told her to stop asking for trouble. I just slapped her yesterday, and could do it again after I finished getting ready. I rushed into my space, bathed, changed into my only nice dress, and headed to the kitchen with my basket. I'd already guessed my stepmother would either skip lunch or deliberately make terrible food to sabotage my engagement dinner, so I took charge. On my way home, I'd bought 4 meat dishes and 2 vegetable dishes from the state-run restaurant. I also killed the rooster from my space, plucked it, and made braised chicken. I whipped up a steamed egg custard with 6 eggs, drizzled with sesame oil and vinegar, and cooked a pot of millet and green bean porridge. Everything was served on my new dishes. My stepmother was deliberately staying at work, smugly thinking she'd ruined my day. She'd locked the food cabinet, so she assumed I'd have nothing to cook and would humiliate myself in front of Lu Huijin's family. She figured that without family support, Even after marriage, I'd be treated poorly. She had no idea I didn't need her locked cabinet at all. When Lu Huijin arrived with his parents, they walked into a house with only my father sitting in a cloud of cigarette smoke, looking anxious. He was worried about the Li Chang situation. Would the factory director retaliate? And Lu Huijin's family being far away meant no career benefits for him. He wasn't happy about this marriage at all. I came out of the kitchen smiling and welcomed Lu Huijin's parents, asking them to sit while I brought out the food. His parents exchanged a look. Their future daughter-in-law was cooking her own engagement meal because her stepmother couldn't be bothered to show up. They immediately understood my situation in this household. Lu Huijin went to the kitchen to help carry the hot bowls. He noticed the porridge was scalding and insisted on carrying it himself to protect my hands. I appreciated that, and let him. When Yaozi came home from school and saw the feast, he forgot everything else and dove straight in, breaking any remaining awkwardness. My father offered Lu Huijin's father a drink, but Lu's father politely declined. They had things to do that afternoon. Yaozi asked where his mother and sister were. Su Ruhua was actually hiding in her little balcony room the whole time, not wanting anyone to see her bruised face, but the smell of food was torturing her. My father stiffly lied, saying they were out on errands. Lu Huijin's mother tried the braised chicken, and her eyes lit up. The sauce was rich. The meat was tender and flavorful. She couldn't stop praising it. I told her the chicken was freshly killed, which made it taste better. Then I served her a small bowl of my steamed egg custard, silky smooth with a touch of sesame oil, vinegar, and scallions. She gave me a thumbs up. Lu Huijin tasted both dishes too. He could tell the other dishes were from the restaurant, but these two were homemade and clearly superior. Lu Huijin kept going back for more of my braised chicken. It was the first dish finished. The egg custard was a hit too, with Yaozi practically burying his face in his bowl. Between three hungry men, all the food was cleaned up perfectly. Lu Huijin even had 2 bowls of my millet porridge and commented on how good it was. My father went for a second bowl too, finishing the pot. Su Ruhua waited desperately in her little room for everyone to leave so she could eat the leftovers, but they kept going. Then Lu Huijin's father got down to business. He said the bride price would be 188 yuan, and since I'd be following Lu Huijin to the military base, they'd prepare everything else there. He pulled out a big red envelope and handed it directly to me. Lu Huijin had instructed him to do that beforehand. My father's hand twitched forward but pulled back. He figured he'd get the money for me after they left. Lu Huijin's mother mentioned they'd also brought fabric for me to make clothes, since I didn't have a mother to help with these things. Yaozi blurted out that his mother wasn't dead. Lu Huijin's mother apologized for forgetting about the stepmother, since she hadn't bothered to show her face all day. It was a perfectly aimed insult. Right on cue, my stepmother walked through the door and heard every word. She was livid, slamming the door and announcing herself coldly. My father jumped up making excuses about her being busy at work. Before things could settle, there was another knock at the door. My stepmother opened it to find workers from the neighborhood committee in uniforms with red badges. They asked for me by name and announced that Su Ruhua had come in that morning to register me for countryside assignment. My departure date was set for the 19th, destination a remote village in Gansu province's northwest. I pointed at myself in disbelief. How could my stepsister sign me up without my knowledge? The workers said I technically qualified under the policy, and names were already submitted. They couldn't cancel it, but they could let me change the location. I glanced at my stepmother's smug face, my father looking down in silence, and could practically feel Su Ruhua gloating behind the curtain in her room, until she accidentally knocked a pen to the floor, making a sharp sound. Lu Huijin had sensed someone hiding on the balcony during dinner and moved to check. I grabbed his sleeve and said it was just a mouse. Lu Huijin stepped forward, showed the workers his military officer's ID, and explained we were getting married and I'd be joining him at the base. Could they make an exception? The lead worker said if this had been settled that morning they could have pretended nothing happened, but the paperwork was already filed. The political review for military family status would take 2 months. They couldn't just hold the slot. I made a quick decision. Instead of fighting it, I asked them to change my destination to a village in Heilongjiang province, near where my maternal grandfather had been sent for labor reform. If I was going to the countryside anyway, I might as well be close enough to check on him. Once Lu Huijin's paperwork cleared, I'd leave for the base. With my space, a few months in the countryside wouldn't be hard. And it kept me away from whatever schemes Su Ruhua might cook up while I waited. Su Ruhua nearly fainted with rage in her hiding spot when she heard I'd simply changed the location, making her careful sabotage worthless. The workers quickly wrote up the change, handed me my educated youth certificate and grain rations, thanked me for supporting the countryside movement, and practically ran out the door before I could change my mind. The room fell into awkward silence. Lu Huijin's mother took my hand and walked me outside. Once we were alone, she offered to have Lu Huijin's grandfather pull some strings to get me out of the assignment entirely. I shook my head and smiled. It's only 2 or 3 months. I'll be fine. I'd learned at the department store that Lu Huijin's parents were researchers, and there were rumors circulating about their family. His grandfather was a retired military commander whose influence still drew unwanted attention. Using connections to get me out of the countryside assignment could give enemies ammunition, especially with my own grandfather's situation. So fighting the assignment wasn't worth the risk. After Lu Huijin's mother walked away, he came over and handed me another stack of 10 yuan bills. He said he didn't know if I had enough money after paying for the engagement lunch, and offered to take me shopping tomorrow for countryside supplies. He'd already called his base to start my political review, which would take about 2 months. He'd come get me himself if he wasn't on a mission. He told me to send telegrams if I needed anything, and warned me never to go out alone at night in the countryside. It wasn't safe for young women. Meanwhile, Su Ruhua had jumped out through the balcony window the moment we all left. She found the table completely clean, not a scrap of food remaining. She whined to my father about nobody saving her anything. He felt a tiny bit guilty, but defended himself, saying Lu Huijin and his father were military men with big appetites, plus Yaozi ate a lot too. Yaozi chimed in that the food was delicious and asked why she hadn't come out to eat with everyone. My stepmother had been eyeing the fine fabric Lu Huijin's family had brought. When she overheard them talking about the feast, she ran to the kitchen shrieking about all the food being wasted. She checked her lock, still intact, nothing missing from the cabinet. Then she stormed back demanding to know where the food came from. She accused my father of giving me money. He denied it, but the question made him nervous about his hidden gold stash. I came back inside carrying a wooden stick. Su Ruhua got right in my face, asking where I got money for the food. I tapped the stick on the ground and said, "My fiancé gave it to me." "Got a problem? Then keep it to yourself. Who do you think you are?" My stepmother immediately dropped to the floor and started her old performance, wailing, rolling around, kicking her feet. I just stood there watching. When nobody rushed to comfort her, she launched into a dramatic speech for the neighbors. "I raised this girl from nothing, and now she won't even call me mother. I treat her better than my own daughter. My own child sleeps on the converted balcony. My father didn't even stick around. He'd been worried about his secret stash and bolted to the bedroom to check on it." The compound walls were paper thin, and neighbors started flooding to our open doorway. My stepmother was thrilled. She wanted to destroy my reputation before I married into Lu Huijin's prestigious family. She sobbed about her years of sacrifice, pulling at heartstrings. Some neighbors took her side, calling me an ungrateful wolf. Others murmured that Auntie Lu had said I was actually a good person, so maybe things weren't what they seemed. Someone suggested I just apologize to keep the peace. I waited for my stepmother to finish, then spoke calmly. My stepmother knew today was my engagement dinner. So she ate lunch at the factory cafeteria, came home late on purpose, and locked up every bit of food in the house. The first thing she did when she walked in was check whether the lock was broken. Anyone who doesn't believe me can go look at the kitchen right now. The people who'd been criticizing me went silent. I continued. She claims she treats me better than her own daughter. Then why does her daughter have a wonderful reputation while mine is terrible? Why is it that everyone out there thinks I'm lazy, spoiled, and not fit to be a wife? I kept going, stoking the fire in front of all the neighbors. I pointed out that Su Ruhua stole my boyfriend, yet, somehow, Everyone praised her for it. As for the balcony sleeping arrangement, this house was bought with my birth mother's money. Forget making Su Ruhua sleep on the balcony. I'd be within my rights to throw her, her mother, and her brother out entirely. I wasn't completely sure my mother had paid for the house, but from the novel I knew my father came from extreme poverty, a phoenix who flew out of a poor village. My stepmother was actually his first love from the same village. After my mother died, they conveniently reunited, and he considered himself deeply loyal and romantic. The crowd's opinion shifted fast. People started connecting the dots. A stepmother who doesn't show up for her stepdaughter's engagement, locks up all the food, a stepsister who steals boyfriends, and somehow the victim ends up with a bad reputation? Old neighbors confirmed the house had belonged to my birth mother. They started calling my stepmother a snake. I wiped away fake tears and delivered the final blows. Su Ruhua had tried to steal my current fiancé too by giving me wrong blind date times, and she'd gone to the neighborhood committee that very morning to register me for countryside labor. Everyone gasped. Su Ruhua couldn't take it anymore and rushed out, trying to cover my mouth, her face twisted with panic and fury, nothing like her usual gentle mask. One look at her guilty, bruised face told everyone everything they needed to know. The gossip would spread through the entire compound by afternoon, and with no entertainment in this era, this drama would fuel conversations for months. My stepmother lunged at me, but neighbors held her back. When she screamed that she could hit her own daughter, someone reminded her she'd just said I wasn't hers. My father emerged from the bedroom. He'd been checking on his secret gold stash, which was thankfully untouched. Seeing the crowd packed into his home, he went pale. A busybody filled him in on everything. He forced a smile, promised to handle it, and shooed everyone away. He knew this scandal had just killed his promotion chances. A man who can't manage his household couldn't be trusted to manage subordinates. The moment the door locked behind the last neighbor, he kicked both my stepmother and Su Ruhua. "Are you trying to get me fired?" My stepmother snapped and clawed his face, drawing blood. They started tearing into each other in the living room. I calmly gathered up all the fabric and gifts Lu Huijin's family had brought, carried everything to my room, locked the door, and stored it all in my space. I sat down like a little miser, counting my money and stroking the fine cloth. Let them destroy each other out there. Su Ruhua's reputation in this neighborhood was finished. Finding a husband would be a real challenge now. I fell asleep to the sounds of fighting. In my dreams, I saw something different. I witnessed what really happened to the original Nianyan's birth mother. She came home early from work that day, 6 months pregnant, and heard voices from inside. It was my father and my stepmother, who was supposed to be the hired nanny, in bed together. My mother had asked my father to find household help, and he brought in his secret lover from the village. Through the door, she heard them talking. My stepmother complained about serving my mother and begged for a real job at the factory. My father reassured her it was only a matter of time. My mother stood there, tears streaming, face going white. She understood everything now. All the strange signs she'd noticed suddenly made sense. She knew she needed to leave immediately, but she accidentally knocked over a vase. She tried to run, but her legs gave out. The baby was kicking violently, and contractions hit her. She collapsed, bleeding. When my father and stepmother stumbled out half-dressed, my mother was on the floor begging to be taken to the hospital before she lost the baby. But my stepmother whispered poison in my father's ear. If my mother talked, they'd lose everything: his job, their freedom. They could even be publicly paraded as criminals. Then my stepmother said the cruelest words: "Don't blame me. Blame yourself for having money. Don't worry, after you're gone, I'll take good care of Aigua. We'll have another child together." In the dream, I watched the original Nianyan's mother crawl across the floor, trailing blood, crying for help as the pain overwhelmed her. She finally collapsed. And Su Aigua, the man who had shared her bed for years, just stood there, frozen, watching her die. He didn't call for help. He didn't move. He chose to let her bleed out. After she died, he manufactured an alibi. When he came home from work that evening, he wailed like his world had ended. He didn't eat, bathe, or change clothes for 7 days. Everyone believed he was a devoted, heartbroken husband. The death was ruled a simple pregnancy complication. The original Nian maternal grandparents rushed back. Her grandmother's hair turned white from grief, and her uncle lost his only sister. They never even got to see her one last time. They showered the young Nian with love and gifts, but over the years my stepmother's constant whispering turned the original Nian against them. I woke up with a soaked pillow and clenched fists. This was clearly a hidden plotline the novel's author didn't dare include. It would have made the heroine's rise too obviously built on a murdered woman's corpse. I nearly vomited from rage. Now I understood why I'd transmigrated here. We'd both been betrayed by our partners, and maybe I was sent to avenge this woman's death. I was furious that I'd cooked a feast for Su Igua at lunch. But what he ate, he'd pay back tenfold. Reporting him to the police wouldn't work. Too many years had passed, no evidence, no witnesses. He hadn't technically laid a hand on her. The law couldn't touch him. So I'd handle justice my own way. The house was empty. I felt my jade bracelet. It could sense gold and precious metals. If it could detect jewelry, maybe it could find the gold bars my father had stolen from my birth mother. The marriage was settled. All pretenses were dropped, and this man had watched my mother die. He had no right to her inheritance. I searched his bedroom systematically, running my wrist along the walls, the floor, inside the cabinets. Nothing. Then I noticed a wooden panel by the headboard. My wrist felt warm near it. I moved the bed and found a baby poster stuck to the wall. Tapping behind it revealed a hollow space, and inside was a beautifully carved wooden box. I opened it and nearly went blind from the gleam. 14 little gold bars shaped like fish, bright and beautiful. I took every single one and dropped them into my space, along with a property deed I found at the bottom, still in my birth mother's name. Apparently my father had never bothered to change it. I stored that too. Then I put everything back exactly as it was. Back in my space, the black soil had expanded again. Piled on the ground was a mountain of new seed packets. The gold had been converted. Rice, millet, cabbage, corn, grapes, pomegranates, longan, sugar mandarins, loofah, cherry tomatoes, regular tomatoes, peppers, long beans, and even tea plants including pu'er and biliuakun. I could now plant things with just my thoughts, which saved enormous effort. I planted the biliuakun tea seeds and checked on my ginseng. The small plant and the slices had sprouted red berries above ground. Looking at the Maotai liquor I'd bought, I felt guilty about not being able to offer any dowry to match Lu Huijin's family's generosity. I'd once worked at a distillery and learned herbal winemaking from a Cantonese master, so I added a cup of spirit spring water and some ginseng to the Maotai. The leftover white liquor I drank in one gulp, my first taste of the famous stuff, and honestly it wasn't that impressive. I spent the rest of the day fulfilling Wang Shen's order, sitting in my space endlessly harvesting, replanting, and watering with spirit spring water. Eventually the alcohol kicked in, and I passed out right there on the ground, dreaming of nothing but harvesting and planting on repeat. When I woke up, my space was piled high with grain. Apparently my body had kept harvesting and planting even while I was dreaming drunk. I made a mental note to always sleep in the space from now on. My stepmother and father weren't having such a good time. At work, people would stop talking the moment she appeared and start again the second she left. My father had scratch marks on his face from their fight and kept telling people a neighbor's baby had scratched him. Nobody believed him. Everyone who'd heard the lunchtime gossip just gave him meaningful looks. He felt like he'd swallowed a fly. The next morning, I spotted Lu Huijin waiting at the compound entrance holding something. When I got close, he handed me a black stick-shaped object for self-defense in the countryside. I thought it was nunchucks, but he demonstrated it was an electric stun baton. Powerful enough to disable someone but not kill them. He taught me to strike fast and run. I loved it immediately. I'd been planning to make pepper spray for my space-grown chili peppers, but this was far better. It ran on regular batteries and would last the 2 months I'd be away. He noticed I was wearing the same dress from our first meeting, clearly my only nice outfit. Without making a fuss about it, he just said, "Get in the car." It was morning rush hour and our compound residents got quite a show. Yesterday they'd heard I'd landed a good match, but assumed the man must be ugly or sickly to want someone with my reputation. Now they saw Lu Huijin, tall, handsome, in full military uniform, standing next to a military jeep.
Their jaws dropped.
People started saying Heat Songhao had thrown away a watermelon and picked up a sesame seed. Heat Songhao's mother happened to be passing by on her way to work. Neighbors gleefully told her that Su Ruhua had apparently been eyeing other men too, putting horns on her precious son. The woman's face went dark. She decided right then to write her son a letter warning him about Su Ruhua. That girl would never set foot in her house. I realized Lu Huijin had deliberately lingered at the gate in his uniform with his jeep, letting everyone see us together. He was establishing my status as a military wife, so people would treat me with more respect. I felt genuinely grateful for his thoughtfulness. My feelings toward him grew a little warmer. At the department store, he took me to the women's floor with a stack of cash. I felt slightly embarrassed, but my wardrobe was practically empty and shopping would be harder in the countryside. I picked out clothes quickly, holding each one up and asking, "Does this look good?" Every time he just nodded. His face was so stoic it was almost funny. Very much a straight man who had never been asked fashion opinions before. Lucky for him, his face made up for the personality. The sales clerks weren't watching me though. Their eyes were glued to Lu Huijin. When he walked closer to me, I clearly heard one of them click her tongue and mutter, "Looks like a seductress and acts like one too." Last time she was with a different man, and now she's already clinging to this one. That was about me, and it made my blood boil. I believe in not holding things in. Swallow your anger, and you'll get sick. I spun around and marched straight toward them. They froze. The one who'd spoken, a woman named Liru, stepped forward defiantly. "Yeah, I said it." "So what?" "You just married well, that's all." I told her to apologize. She puffed up and declared she'd never apologize to anyone in her life. Then Lu Huijin turned his cold gaze on her. His face was handsome, but in that moment his eyes held absolutely zero warmth, the look of a man who'd seen real combat. He said just 2 words. The sales clerk hung her head but refused to apologize. Lu Huijin grabbed my hand and pulled me downstairs. I didn't understand why we were leaving, but I went along quietly. The clerk behind us sighed with relief, thinking she'd gotten away with it. Downstairs, Lu Huijin stopped at the watch counter and told me to pick one while he went back upstairs alone. I chose a pretty silver chain watch. Watches were one of the 3 must-haves for marriage in this era, and I wouldn't find one easily in the countryside. When he came back, he paid 120 yuan plus an industrial coupon without blinking. Just as we were about to leave, the rude clerk from upstairs came running down and bowed a full 90 degrees. "I'm sorry, it was all my fault." Her voice was shaking with fear. I looked at Lu Huijin and asked if he'd hit her. He just twitched the corner of his mouth. The clerk was nearly crying, begging me not to cost her the job. I told her she could keep it, but she had to bring all her gossiping friends down to apologize to me together. Watching her face cycle through red and white, her arrogance completely gone, was deeply satisfying. After that, he took me to the supply store to buy everything I'd need for the countryside, including a blindingly bright flashlight. Since I'd only been gone a couple months, we skipped winter bedding but bought 2 sets of sheets and covers, which made the clerk shake her head at such extravagance. The clerk who'd given me white rabbit candies last time recognized me and spotted Lu Huijin in his uniform. She told her mother about the generous military wife, and her mother had called her gullible. Well, here was the proof she'd been right all along. On the drive home with a full trunk, Lu Huijin gave me his family's old residence address for letters and told me he'd already contacted the village chief, where I'd be staying, to look out for me. His words were caring, but his face made it seem like he was just completing a standard checklist, like any wife of his would get this treatment. He said he'd pick me up tomorrow to take me to the train station. As he unloaded, I noticed the sweat on his face and the muscles showing through his sleeves. I ran inside and grabbed the medicinal wine I'd made, Maotai infused with spirit spring water and space-grown ginseng. I told him to give it to his father for health, explaining I'd found the ginseng on a mountain trip with classmates. He tried to refuse, but I insisted. I knew I had no dowry to offer, and this was my way of not feeling like a complete freeloader. He seemed to understand my pride and accepted it graciously. Neighbors were starting to gather, so I gently pushed his arm and told him to drive safely. After he left, I felt a bit shabby. I'd given something to his father, but had nothing for his mother. My space fruits weren't ripe yet. I couldn't exactly send her meat buns. Lu Huijin drove home fast and tossed the bottle to his father. From Su Nyanyan, his mother spotted the Maotai label and tried to confiscate it for a special occasion, impressed that I'd spent so much. But Lu Huijin told her it was medicinal wine. His father immediately clutched the bottle tight, declaring he needed to taste his future daughter-in-law's gift. Under his wife's watchful eye, he allowed himself just one small cup. He savored it and noticed the ginseng floating inside. Almost immediately, warmth spread through his body. His fatigue lifted, and his old leg pain, which always flared up in damp weather, actually eased. He announced excitedly that his leg felt much better. His wife snatched the bottle away, accusing him of making up excuses to drink more, as usual. He pressed his knee and wondered if maybe it wasn't his imagination after all. Meanwhile, things were falling apart for Su Ruhua. She'd gone to He Tsonghao's mother that afternoon with 2 jin of egg cakes as a peace offering. The woman knocked them to the ground and announced she was no longer just going to write a letter. She was going to call her son directly to end things. Nobody at home cared whether I was around. My stepmother was blaming Su Ruhua for ruining the family's reputation by stealing my boyfriend. My father was worried his promotion was dead. Everyone was saying he'd become a deadbeat dad after remarrying. Meanwhile, He Tsonghao's mother had called her son right in front of Su Ruhua, telling him to come home and dump her personally. Su Ruhua tried to use the phone after her, but the operator refused. I was out on the street trying to figure out how to sell my birth mother's house. I had the deed with her name still on it, but I didn't know where to find a buyer who'd pay cash on the spot. The original Nyanyan's social circle was too clean, no street-smart contacts who could help with something like this. While wandering, I heard a commotion and went to investigate. A well-dressed young woman in a nice dress was clutching a pillar for dear life while a muscular man tried to drag her away. She was crying and screaming for help, saying she didn't know him. He was cursing, calling her his wife, and accusing her of cheating with another man. An old lady nearby told me the woman had been caught cheating and her husband was taking her back. But something didn't add up. Where was the supposed lover? And I noticed the woman's hands were smooth and clean, clearly pampered. A man this rough with his wife would never let her live so comfortably. This wasn't a domestic dispute. This was a kidnapping. I pushed through the crowd and demanded, "How do you prove she's your wife?" The man spat on the ground and said it was none of my business. I pressed harder. "What's her name? Where's she from?" He answered without hesitation, "Sueme, from Datong village nearby." The girl kept shaking her head, crying that she wasn't his wife and that she had a fiancé. He slapped her hard across the face. The crowd was useless. People were actually siding with the man, saying he was being patient for not beating a cheating wife. Worse. I was horrified. Then an old woman appeared and slapped the girl too, making her mouth bleed. She wailed about her poor son being stuck with a shameless woman while secretly signaling the man to hurry up and leave. But the man had noticed me. His eyes crawled over my body and lingered on my new watch. I could tell he was calculating whether he could grab me too. I shouted to the crowd, "Don't believe them. They're human traffickers. Can someone please go find the police?" I cursed the lack of cell phones in this era. I gripped the stun baton in my pocket, ready to use it. I yelled encouragement to the girl to hold on, then pointed out to the crowd that if the old woman were really the man's mother, she would have stepped in immediately instead of appearing from the crowd only now. I even described her face, sharp chin, no earlobes, mean eyes, saying she looked exactly like the type of person who'd do terrible things. The old woman sensed the situation was turning against them. She tried to pull the man away, ready to cut their losses and leave with just the one girl. The man wanted me too, but the old woman could see I wasn't an easy target. Their nervous backward glances were starting to reveal their true nature to the crowd. The crowd finally started catching on. People remembered the old woman had been standing among them watching the whole time. A real mother-in-law would have rushed in immediately. Voices rose up. Don't let them leave. Someone ran to a nearby shop and brought back security guards. The crowd surrounded the pair. The man and old woman exchanged a look and tried to bolt. He pulled a knife from his pocket and started waving it around. The crowd screamed and began to part.
He was about to escape.
I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my stun baton and jabbed it into his lower back. His whole body went stiff, trembling like he'd been struck by lightning. In that split second of confusion, I snatched the knife from his hand. The crowd surged back in, kicking and punching him to the ground. The old woman tried to run with a knife of her own, but the police arrived just in time, catching her with a swift kick and cuffing her hands. I helped the girl in the dress. She was ghostly pale, shaking uncontrollably. The police asked us both to come to the station for statements. I checked my watch. 5 o'clock, plenty of time before my 9 o'clock meeting with Wang Shen. The officer mentioned I might qualify for a Courageous Citizen award, which immediately got my attention. That kind of commendation in my file could help with my political review for joining Lu Huijin at the military base. I'm practical. I'd done the good deed, so I might as well collect the benefits. At the station, the girl couldn't stop trembling around male officers and clung to me, so a female officer took her statement. Her name was Zhou Min. When they asked for my address, I gave the one Lu Huijin had given me earlier that day. Zhou Min wouldn't let go of me until her people arrived. A man rushed in and she threw herself into his arms, sobbing. He looked at me and asked if I was the one who'd saved her. Behind him was another man. They introduced themselves, Su Tianyang and his younger brother Su Tianfei. Zhou Min was Tianfei's fiancé. Su Tianyang noticed I seemed anxious about time and offered to drive me wherever I needed to go. I was hesitant about getting in a car with strangers, but they were handsome, had a nice car, and we were standing outside a police station. If I disappeared, Lu Huijin would report me missing tomorrow. I gave them an address near the black market. In the car, Su Tianyang suddenly asked, "Are you going to the black market?" I froze and denied it. But he smiled knowingly. Turns out he'd seen me there before from a second-floor tea house. His people had told him my goods were excellent quality. He said my disguise was useless because my distinctive eyes gave me away every time. He'd let me operate because my quantities were small, and his black market was more of a side hobby anyway. He cleared his throat and told me a girl shouldn't go to the black market, then asked if there was anything he could help with. I clutched my bag and thought about it. I'd helped save his brother's fiancé, so asking a favor in return seemed fair. I told him I wanted to sell my family's house. It was in my birth mother's name. My father had remarried a cruel stepmother, and I was being forced to the countryside tomorrow. I admitted I made it sound a bit more pitiful than necessary, but it was all true. He thought for a moment and asked where the house was. When I said the textile factory compound, he frowned. Compound housing couldn't be sold outright, only rented. He offered a solution. We'd sign a rental agreement. He'd manage the property and collect rent, and the house would still be mine when I came back. I was disappointed to learn houses in the compound couldn't be sold, only rented. But Su Tianyang offered to handle it. He'd sign a rental contract, manage the property, and keep it safe until I returned. He asked where I was being sent, and offered to help get me back, though he admitted it would take time. I smiled and told him I'd only be in the countryside for 2 or 3 months. My fiancé had already submitted the marriage application, and once it cleared, I'd join him at the military base. His hands went white on the steering wheel. His brother Su Tianfei nearly burst out laughing in the back seat. Apparently in 20-plus years, this was the first time his older brother had shown interest in a woman, and she was already taken. Zhou Min, now recovering from her ordeal, asked how long I'd known my fiancé. I said we'd known each other for years, but had only reconnected a few days ago. Su Tianyang's jaw tightened. He asked if I needed money, probably wondering if I'd sold myself into a rushed marriage out of desperation. I shook my head and said confidently, "I'm not poor, and someday I'll be even richer." He drove us to the state-run restaurant for a thank-you dinner. Zhou Min insisted, saying she owed me her safety and the least I could accept was a meal. Over dinner, Su Tianyang asked more about my house and family situation, then drafted a 3-year rental agreement on the spot. We both signed and used the restaurant's ink pad for fingerprints. When he tried to hand me money, I refused. He was already doing me a huge favor by taking on a disputed property. Having him move in would drive out my stepmother's family, which was revenge enough. He offered to take me to the train station tomorrow. I told him my fiancé was already handling that, but asked if he could drop me at the steel factory compound instead. I needed to visit a relative before leaving. He drove me there without another word, watching until I walked inside before turning the car around. In the back seat, Su Tianfei nudged Zhou Min and then told his brother, "She's not married yet. If you like her, go for it." "There's still a chance," Su Tianyang replied coldly and drove off. At the compound gate, the guard questioned why a young woman was coming alone at night. I rubbed a bit of chili water on my eyes to produce tears and said I'd had a fight with my family and was visiting my aunt, Wang Shen, whose real name was Wang Aixia. The guard recognized the name and let me sign in. I scribbled a fake name. I found the abandoned guard booth, cleaned off the dust with wheat stalks from my space, and laid out the bags of rice and flour with weights and prices marked on them. Then I slipped into my space to wait. Some of my plants had already grown waist-high. I searched for the apple tree and found it. For the next half hour, I poured spirit spring water on it, watching it grow from a sapling to a flowering tree to producing actual fruit, green at first, then slowly ripening to red. Apples were the safest fruit to deal in. They were universal currency in this era and wouldn't raise suspicions like exotic fruits would. I picked 2 and was about to take a bite when I heard noises outside. It was Wang Shun and her husband. Old Wang had stubbed his toe on something in the dark. They were both nervous, feeling like criminals on their first heist. He peered inside, saw nobody, and told his wife to stay outside as lookout while he went in first. Wang Shun paused and thought to herself that after all these years, she'd married a decent man. Old Wang crept into the booth with his borrowed wooden cart and was stunned by the piles of grain on the floor. He found my note with prices, left the money, then pulled out a fruit knife and stabbed into a random bag to check the quality. What he didn't know is that I'd gotten curious about what was taking so long and had snuck out of my space to stand right behind him, watching him poke holes in my merchandise. I frowned. The bag started leaking rice everywhere. Wang Shun heard her husband's panicked whisper and came in, furious at the mess. She quickly wrapped the punctured bag with a small cloth sack and they started hauling everything out. By the time they came back for the second load, the money was gone. I'd already taken it. They were spooked, realizing I'd been watching from somewhere the whole time. Old Wang was glad he'd been honest. Wang Shin told him they needed to distribute all the grain to relatives immediately. If anyone spotted their haul or if officials came checking, they'd be in serious trouble. I slipped out when the guard fell asleep, squeezing through the small gate like a shadow. Outside, I was surprised to see a car still parked with its lights flashing. It was Su Tianyang. He'd waited for me, guessing I'd come back out. I wasn't about to refuse a ride at this hour. Walking alone at night after what I'd just done was terrifying enough that I might never do a late-night deal again. In the car, I caught myself alternating between frowning and smiling as I thought about everything. He asked if something was wrong. I snapped back to reality, pulled 2 red apples from my bag, freshly picked from my space, and placed them on the center console as thanks. He told me we were 10 minutes away, and I could nap if I wanted. He'd noticed me yawning. I almost closed my eyes, but then a thought jolted me awake. Was this man interested in me? I immediately scolded myself for being conceited. He'd only met me once. It was probably just concern for my safety. I stared out the window instead, watching the dark 1970s streets lit only by headlights. Everything looked so simple and raw. Thinking about how much this country would transform in the next few decades, I felt a wave of emotion so strong my nose stung. This was the capital. I'd be back someday, and I'd grow alongside this nation. At my compound gate, I hopped out, waved goodbye, and walked in. Su Tianyang rolled down his window, smelled the apple, and drove away. Someone hiding behind a tree in the shadows had seen everything. Back home, I collapsed into bed exhausted. The next morning, the house was empty again, perfect. I went on a rampage. I swept every single item from my room into my space. Then I cleaned out the kitchen completely. All the grain from my stepmother's locked cabinet, every seasoning, pot, pan, bowl, and utensil. Not even a flour sack remained. I moved to the living room and took the sofa and dining table. Then I went into my father's bedroom and took his wooden wardrobe and bed. If nothing else, I'd burn it all as firewood. He didn't deserve to keep anything that existed because of my birth mother's money. I wished I had more time for proper revenge, but there would be plenty of opportunities later. With 10 minutes to spare, I straightened my clothes, grabbed a woven plastic bag, and headed to the gate. Lu Huijin was standing by his car, but Su Ruhua was right there, gesturing wildly and talking at him. My face went cold immediately. He spotted me and walked over quickly, reaching for my bag and apologizing for not coming upstairs to get me. I pulled the bag away and said flatly, "It's fine. You seemed busy chatting with someone else." He glanced at the people around us, firmly took my luggage anyway, and said we'd talk in the car. As I passed Su Ruhua, she sneered, "You're finished." I had no idea what she meant, but I hoped she'd stay calm when she got home and found the house stripped bare. I told her, "If you're feeling itchy, go home and slap yourself with a shoe. If you don't have one, I can lend you mine." She stared at my cute little sandals showing off my white feet, then looked down at her own plain cloth.
Shoes.
Ignoring the insult entirely, she fixated on the offer. "I want the ones on your feet." I rolled my eyes at Su Ruhua and climbed into the passenger seat. I immediately regretted my earlier comment about the shoe. My mouth had gotten ahead of my brain. As Lu Huijin was about to get in on his side, he shot Su Ruhua an icy look that froze her mid-insult. She'd been waiting all night for Heat somehow to come back after his mother's phone call, but he never showed. She looked exhausted. Once we were driving, the humid summer air made everything feel suffocating even with the windows down. I sneaked a glance at Lu Huijin and cringed. My internet slang from my previous life kept slipping out at the worst moments. The embarrassment was enough to build a castle. He broke the silence. "Should I explain?" He said it casually, noting that I looked angry with my cheeks puffed up like a goldfish blowing bubbles. That almost made me laugh despite my irritation. Yes, I'd said something stupid, but he was the one who'd been standing there with Su Ruhua. Knowing what that woman and my father had done to the original Nianyan's mother made me despise her even more. The thought that we might share the same father made my skin crawl. He explained calmly. "The moment I got out of the car, she tried to grab me. I stepped aside. She told me you came home last night with another man. That's all she said before I saw you walking over." Then he added quietly, "I didn't say a single word to her." My face heated up. Being seen getting out of a man's car late at night in this era was definitely suspicious. And worse, I'd actually been out selling grain illegally. If Lu Huijin ever investigated, I might end up being studied in a laboratory. He asked what happened. I could tell he was fishing, and he even mentioned hearing the man was handsome. I blurted out the truth quickly. I'd encountered human traffickers on the street, saved a girl, and her family had treated me to dinner as thanks, which was why I was out late. The man was the rescued girl's brother-in-law, nothing more. We've only met once. We didn't even hold hands. I felt pathetic, like someone caught cheating when I hadn't done anything wrong. But I only bothered explaining because I actually liked Lu Huijin. Otherwise, I wouldn't have cared. He caught that my first excuse was a lie, but the second part was genuine. Then a thought seemed to cross his mind. He hadn't held my hand either, so technically he and that stranger were on equal footing. He changed the subject. "Let's eat first. Train food is terrible." We stopped at the state-run restaurant. He ordered 2 plates of pork and scallion dumplings, stir-fried greens, and cold pig stomach. When he asked if I wanted anything else, I tried to hand him 2 yuan. He pushed my money back. Over food, he asked more about the trafficker incident. I enthusiastically praised the stun baton he'd given me. He went quiet for a moment, then said seriously, "I gave you that to protect yourself, not to chase criminals. What if they'd had a worse weapon? As a soldier, fighting bad guys was his duty, but he wanted me to prioritize my own safety." I smiled up at him and said, I was only brave because I had your gift. Without it, I'd never have tried. He seemed satisfied, then casually asked what the man's relationship to the rescued girl was. I told him, her husband's older brother, and added that they'd invited me to dinner, which was why it got late. His eyebrow twitched slightly. When the dumplings arrived, plump, generous portions, I realized I couldn't finish my plate and offered to share some onto his. I hesitated, unsure if our relationship had reached the sharing food off your plate stage. He pushed his plate toward me without a word. As I was scooping dumplings, he noticed little details. My hair seemed shorter and blacker. My eyes were dewy. I was wearing the olive green shirt we'd bought together yesterday. My forearms looked pale and too thin. When I kept transferring more dumplings than I should, his hand gently touched my wrist to stop me. That's enough. You're too thin, eat more. He pulled his plate back and popped a dumpling in his mouth, pretending to be calm. I bit into one too. Thin skin, juicy filling bursting with flavor. I thought about how incredible these would taste made with my space-grown flour. Lost in the deliciousness, I ate happily, one small bite at a time. Liu Huijin was stuffing whole dumplings into his mouth without tasting them. He seemed distracted. I didn't know it, but he was having a small crisis over the fact that touching my wrist had left him flustered. The man who'd resisted all kinds of temptation during military missions was shaken by accidentally feeling how soft my skin was. He eventually told himself it was only because I was his fiancée, and that calmed him down. We finished the meal in comfortable silence. At the train station, I pulled a bag of red apples from my pack and handed them to him. Comrade Liu, these are for you. I felt I owed him after everything he'd done for me. He looked at the apples and immediately concluded I'd gone out the night before specifically to buy fruit for him. He told me to be careful when shopping and to go out less. He clearly knew these weren't from any official store. Then he handed me a package his mother had prepared with pastries for the journey. He carried my luggage onto the train and found my seat. He'd managed to upgrade the second half of my trip to a hard sleeper berth since full sleepers were sold out. He gave me a slip of paper with his military contact information and reminded me to prioritize my own safety above everything else. He scanned the other passengers, mostly young people heading to the countryside, and seemed satisfied it looked safe enough. Then he caught someone staring at him, and the thought crossed his mind that if I saw women looking at him, I'd be angry the whole trip. He cut himself off before he got too wordy. I'm leaving, and he was gone without looking back. The moment he stepped off, I felt a wave of relief. His tall figure had been drawing stares from everyone in the car, and by extension they were all studying me too. Sure enough, a girl with two big braids across from me immediately asked if that man was my brother. She figured a husband wouldn't let his wife go to the countryside. Others leaned in, waiting for my answer. Despite my social anxiety, I said clearly, he's my fiancé. Everyone who'd been thinking about chatting me up instantly cooled off. I looked out the window. He was still standing there in his uniform, straight as a pine tree, waiting for my train to leave before he'd go. We hadn't even started dating properly, yet I felt a pang of reluctance to leave. Maybe it was because in this whole world, he was the first person to show me genuine kindness. The whistle blew 3 times, and the train lurched forward. I waved at him through the window. I'd been staring at him for a full minute without blinking, he'd counted. His ears turned red. He clenched his fist and decided to push his superiors to speed up the paperwork. He admitted to himself that he'd only agreed to the blind date because his grandfather forced him. But when he saw me, small face, fair skin, he understood for the first time what people meant by beautiful. His mother always said he was good-looking and then said the same about me during the matchmaking. This was his first concrete understanding of the word. He realized he was, in fact, the kind of man who could be moved by a pretty face. Without that, no one on earth could have made him agree. Back at home, his mother spotted the apples immediately and scolded him for not giving them all to me for the journey. He told her I'd given them to him. She grabbed one, washed it, and bit in before even drying it off. Her eyes went wide. She declared it was incredible and started planning to bring some to Liu Huijin's grandfather. His father heard the crunching from inside, came out pretending not to care, then tried to snatch his wife's apple. She dodged, genuinely unwilling to share. He grabbed his own from the bag, and soon all three of them were standing together eating apples in amazed silence. His father announced these were the best apples he'd ever had. They counted 11 remaining. His mother claimed 6 to bring to the grandfather along with other gifts, set aside 2 for the children who were still napping, and immediately regretted letting the old man take a whole one for himself. Lu Huijin just stood there realizing he still hadn't gotten a single bite of his own. Su Ruhua couldn't shake what I'd said about going home and slapping herself with a shoe. Curiosity got the better of her, and she headed home. The moment she opened the door, she let out a shriek. The living room was completely bare. Even the shoe rack by the entrance was gone. She slammed the door shut, then realized locking it was pointless since there was nothing left to steal. She ran all the way to my father's factory, blowing past Hee Sung-ha's mother without even noticing her. When she found my father's office, he was in a meeting. She paced outside until she couldn't take it anymore and knocked, saying she had something urgent. He dismissed her. He couldn't leave a meeting for this, especially not after the public embarrassment from the other day. She stomped her feet in frustration and finally yelled, "Our house has been robbed." The room shook. Everyone in the meeting politely excused themselves. My father's face went white. He leaped up and sprinted home without even requesting leave. All he could think about was his golden fish bars. His pudgy body moved faster than Su Ruhua could keep up. She called after him that everything was already gone, but he wasn't listening. He burst through the door, ran straight to the bedroom, and found his hiding spot empty. He collapsed to the floor. Who had a key and could clean out an entire house? It had to be an inside job. His mind went straight to my stepmother. They'd been fighting. She hadn't spoken to him all day. She must have been planning this. Nosy neighbors who'd heard the commotion gathered around. One old lady peered inside and slapped her thigh. "Are you splitting up the household? You've divided everything down to nothing." My father spat through clenched teeth that they'd been robbed. He sent Su Ruhua to call the police. The neighbors were skeptical. Nobody had heard any moving sounds, and what kind of thief steals old furniture? The police came, measured the rooms, checked for signs of forced entry, questioned the neighbors. They found absolutely nothing. No break-in marks, no evidence of anything. Then Su Ruhua had her light bulb moment. I was the last person to leave the house that morning. She triumphantly reported me to the police. But before the officer could even respond, a neighbor shut her down. I watched Su Nianyan leave with her fiancé this morning. She had one single woven bag.
How could she fit a sofa in that?
And she's a military wife. You'd better watch what you say before your tongue falls off. The police promptly ruled me out. Then another neighbor chimed in. I bet Ruhua is trying to frame Nianyan because she's after her fiancé again. Others agreed. That girl has really gone crooked. Su Ruhua wanted to scream. She knew she was right, but once again everything had been turned against her. The police found no useful clues and left, promising to return if anything turned up. My father sat motionless on the bare floor, ashen-faced. When my stepmother came home at noon and saw my father staring at her with murderous red eyes, she wasn't particularly upset. The stolen furniture had all been bought during his first marriage. She'd always considered it bad luck. She almost wanted to thank whoever took it. My father could read her like a book. After years together, he knew what she looked like when she was genuinely angry versus when she wasn't. The fact that she wasn't upset about losing everything told him everything he needed to know, or so he thought. He was convinced she'd done it, and his precious gold bars were gone because of her. She protested. You think I did this? Do I look like someone who could pull this off? He was silent. She protested louder. Am I really the kind of person who could do something like this? More silence. His silence spoke volumes. Even if she couldn't do it alone, she could have had someone help. Until the police gave him a definitive answer, he wasn't saying a word. My stepmother went to the kitchen first and found every pot, pan, and utensil gone. The lock on the food cabinet was still intact, but when she opened it, completely empty. That's when the real scream came. My father sat outside listening, thinking she was putting on another act. But when she ran to the bedroom and discovered even the bed was missing, along with the wardrobe containing all her clothes and hidden money, she started hyperventilating and bouncing off the walls. Hearing her genuine panic, my father's expression flickered with doubt. Maybe it really wasn't her after all. With no kitchen, no pots, no food, and no money for restaurants, they had to rush to the factory cafeteria before it closed and buy whatever scraps were left. The whole family ate lunch looking like wilted vegetables. Then they realized they had nowhere to sleep. The only bed left in the house was Yaozi's, and his room was a disaster zone of dirty socks and horrible smells. That was probably exactly why I'd left it untouched. Meanwhile, I was on the train, and it was miserable. Summer heat, no ventilation, a cocktail of body odor, livestock smell, and stale air. Someone had actually brought a live chicken on board. The aisle was packed so tight I couldn't move. The other passengers were all young people heading to the countryside, their faces showing every emotion: excitement, worry, confusion. Someone in the next car was singing. I opened the package from Liu Huijin's mother and found high-calcium crackers, malted milk powder, brown sugar, white rabbit candies, all precious treats in this era, thoughtfully chosen for a young woman. I felt guilty again about only giving them apples. Everyone around me spotted the goodies and started drooling, but I closed the package without eating anything. I had zero appetite in that stench. Instead, I pulled out a big red apple and held it under my nose like an air freshener. I wished it were an orange, that would smell even better. I sat there with the package on my lap, my bag under my feet, and the apple tucked under my chin, leaning against the window with my eyes closed. A girl across from me named Shin Tingting couldn't stop staring at my apple. The boys were staring at my face instead, though they backed off when they remembered I had a military fiancé. One guy named Song Qianjin reasoned that if my fiancé really cared, he could have kept me from being sent to the countryside, so maybe I wasn't as taken as I seemed. His interest perked right back up. I wasn't actually sleeping. My consciousness was in my space, watering seedlings with spirit spring water. My lone hen was still laying several eggs a day on her diet of space-grown grain. The strawberries had ripened into bright red clusters on the vine, filling the air with sweetness. I desperately wanted to eat one. When the dinner announcement came, potato shreds, cauliflower, tomato, egg, rice, I realized I'd skipped lunch and was hungry. But looking at the crush of people in the aisle, I gave up and bit into another apple instead. The crunching sound made everyone stare again. I turned awkwardly toward the window to eat in semi-privacy. Shin Tingting spoke up. "Are you Su Nian?" I looked over. I couldn't find her in my memories. She said she was from our compound, and her younger sister was classmates with Su Ruhua. She'd heard all the gossip about me being lazy and spoiled. She'd been unemployed for 6 months after graduating and got caught by neighborhood workers who pressured her into going to the countryside. I wasn't interested in making friends. I'd only be in the countryside a couple months, and my priority was finding my maternal grandparents. I just nodded and went back to my apple. Shin Tingting took my coldness as confirmation that I was as arrogant as Su Ruhua described. She couldn't believe I wouldn't even share a bite of apple with a fellow compound resident. She decided Su Ruhua was clearly the better sister. A guy named Song Qianjin seized the moment to introduce himself, keeping his eyes locked on me. A girl beside me named Wang Zhaodi also chimed in with her introduction. That name stopped me cold. In the modern era, I'd been an orphan. The orphanage director told me that because of the one-child policy, many families who had a girl first would abandon her. Zhaodi literally means beckoning a younger brother, a name given to unwanted daughters. Something about Wang Zhaodi stirred a wave of sympathy in me. Our situations were more alike than anyone knew. I pulled out a big red apple and handed it to her. She was timid, with 2 braids and chapped lips. "You need some water. Eat this." She waved her hands frantically, refusing. At home, even unripe fruit went to her younger brother. An apple this nice was unthinkable, but I could see her mouth watering as the fragrance hit her nose, and she was trying so hard to hide it. I pushed the apple into her arms and said casually, "Eat it. I'm gonna sleep, just help me keep an eye on my luggage." That gave her a reason to accept without feeling like charity. She took it and promised solemnly to guard everything. She bit into it so carefully, savoring it like the most precious thing she'd ever tasted, which it probably was. for a girl who'd only had brown sugar once in her life. Her eyes never left my bags. The next morning, I found her with bloodshot eyes like a little rabbit. She'd stayed awake the entire night watching my things. I felt terrible and gave her a box of crackers as thanks. She refused at first, saying the apple was more than enough. But I insisted, explaining I was moving to the sleeper car and felt bad for keeping her up all night. Shen Tingting and Song Qianjin watched enviously. One night of luggage watching earned an apple and fancy crackers? They wanted in on that deal. Wang Zhaodi grabbed my bags before I could protest and charged ahead through the packed aisle like a warrior, clearing a path to the sleeper car. Lu Huijin had gotten me a lower bunk, no climbing required. She settled me in efficiently and headed back to her seat without lingering. Behind her, Shen Tingting couldn't resist a nasty comment. Some people really know how to suck up, do a little favor, and get rewarded with treats. Wang Zhaodi's face turned red, but she was used to being put down. She silently pulled out one of the crackers and bit into it loudly right in front of Shen Tingting. The creamy milk flavor almost made her cry. She'd never eaten anything this good. She tilted her head back to keep the tears from falling. Shen Tingting looked at her own stale, slightly sour yellow flour bun, and suddenly lost her appetite. Song Qianjin eyed the crackers too, regretting that his self-introduction gambit had backfired. If he hadn't prompted everyone to introduce themselves, Wang Zhaodi might never have gotten my attention. That evening, Lu Huijin went with his parents to visit his grandfather, bringing 6 of my apples along with other gifts. The old commander was furious that he'd only learned about the engagement through other people. Lu Huijin's father quickly explained that everything happened fast because I was being sent to the countryside. When Lu Huijin's mother presented the apples, saying they were a gift from me, the grandfather's eyes went wide. "You already ate some without me." She smiled sheepishly and admitted they
couldn't resist.
Lu Huijin's grandmother slapped the old man playfully for competing with the younger generation over fruit, then took 3 apples to the kitchen, washed, and sliced them into 2 plates. When she came back, the grandfather was asking Lu Huijin, "So, how's the wife I found you?" He mentioned that my mother had been the most talented woman in the area, and he still couldn't understand why she'd married Su Aigua, a fresh flower stuck in cow dung. Lu Huijin's mind flashed to my blushing face and shy downcast eyes. His heart stirred, but his expression stayed perfectly neutral. "I'll follow your arrangements, grandfather. I've already submitted the paperwork to the military district." The old man patted his hand 3 times. Good, good, good. Treat her well." He felt this fulfilled his duty to his old friend, my grandfather. Then he stabbed several apple slices with a small fork, popped them in his mouth, and froze. He'd never tasted an apple this crisp and sweet in his entire life. Where on earth did that girl buy these apples? Back at the Lu family home, the grandfather and father were practically fighting over the apple slices while the grandmother ate happily beside them. The grandfather grumbled about his son eating his gift. Then his tone turned serious. He told Lu Huijin's parents that their reassignment orders would come through any day now. He couldn't interfere much, but hoped things wouldn't be too bad. The room went quiet. Lu Huijin's parents exchanged a look and said they'd come to share good news, not dwell on that. Meanwhile, at the Su household, things were falling apart. A few chaotic days after I left, my father was lying on a makeshift grass mat when thunderous knocking shook the front door. He got excited, thinking the police had caught the thief. Instead, he opened the door to several burly men who shoved their way inside. The lead man looked around the empty house, baffled. He planned to sit down and intimidate them in style, but there wasn't a single piece of furniture to sit on. He almost felt sorry for my father. Then he pulled out a rental contract with my name on it and told them they had to move out. My father verified it was my handwriting, but argued the house wasn't mine to rent out. The man cut him off. "The deed is in your first wife's name. I'm here to tell you to leave. And do I need to remind you, Director Su, what you've done?" My father went pale. He realized the gold bars must have been taken by me too, and nearly blurted something incriminating before catching himself. Admitting to hidden gold would send him straight to a labor farm. The man slapped my father hard across the face for calling me a slur, then grabbed the chamber pot from the floor and poured it toward his mouth. He went to wash his hands in the kitchen. marveling at how completely empty it was too. He gave them 3 days to leave, warning that if they didn't, he'd make public how my father got his promotion and how my stepmother got her factory job. My father deflated like a stepped-on mouse. After the men left, the family scraped together one 10 yuan bill and checked into a hotel, for people crammed into one standard room. The front desk clerk rolled her eyes, so hard she nearly fell over. In the middle of the night, my stepmother bolted upright with a terrible realization. After years of raising me like a pig for slaughter, the bride price had gone directly into my hands. They'd been kicked out of the house, and they had nothing to show for any of it. She shook my father awake and demanded to know about the bride price. He admitted the Liu family had handed it straight to me and he'd forgotten to take it back. My stepmother hissed that I'd planned everything from the start. My father's eyes went dark. He decided then and there to cut all ties with me as his daughter. As for me, I was on the train enjoying myself. After Wang Zhaodi left, I tucked into my bunk, pulled a jacket over my head, and secretly ate space-grown strawberries, sweet, fragrant, nothing like the tasteless ones from the modern era. I spent the rest of the journey munching on fruit for my space. After the train, I took a bus to Chaoyang Commune, then a bumpy ox cart to Qingshan Brigade. 5 educated youth were being assigned here. Me, Shen Tingting, Song Qianjin, Wang Zhaodi, and a guy named Gao Zhelong from Shanghai. The afternoon heat and dust put me in a sour mood. Shen Tingting noticed my pale face and sweetly offered me her seat near the front of the cart where the bumping was less severe. But I knew exactly what she was after. She'd seen Wang Zhaodi get an apple and crackers just for watching my bags, and figured surrendering her premium seat should earn her at least 1 apple. She wasn't being kind. She was shopping. Shen Tingting's offer to swap seats was obviously a ploy for apples, but I had to handle it carefully. In front of the village officials driving our cart, I couldn't appear spoiled. I put on my most earnest face and said, "No need. Going to the countryside to learn from the peasants means not fearing hardship. That's the quality every educated youth should have." Shen Tingting's mouth twitched. Other people got apples for 3 kind words. She got a lecture. She noticed the ox cart driver and the village party secretary eyeing her with disapproval, as if she were the troublemaker. She tried to recover by saying she was just worried because I'd been pampered my whole life. I shut that down immediately. We barely know each other. We met on the train yesterday. You seem to know me better than I know myself. I needed to distance myself from her fast. Village people hated city kids who came to eat their grain without working, and her comments were painting me as exactly that kind of person. When she blamed Su Ruhua for telling her I was spoiled, I replied coolly, "Seeing is believing. We should have a spirit of seeking truth from facts." She looked like she wanted to crumple into a walnut. After an hour of bone-rattling dirt roads, we arrived at Xiangyang village. The village chief looked us over and sighed. 3 female educated youth and 2 males, one of whom looked soft as tofu. At least one of us, me, was a military wife who'd be leaving in a couple months. He announced that I would stay at his house while the other 4 would go to the educated youth dormitory. Shen Tingting frowned. Why did I get special treatment? Song Qianjin spoke up and challenged the arrangement. The village chief, a former soldier himself, fixed Song Qianjin with a look that made him shrivel instantly. "That room belongs to my married daughter. The dorm is full with you 4 added. I'm letting her use my daughter's empty room." "Got a problem." Song Qianjin retreated with stammering apologies. The guide Li Dabing led the other 4 to the youth quarters, a converted landlord's worker housing that was showing its age. There were already 14 educated youth there, 8 men and 6 women. When Shen Tingting entered the girls' room, she found dirt floors and bare walls. Only the beds looked somewhat clean. She sighed dramatically. Wang Zhaodi, meanwhile, had already claimed the wallside spot and was setting up her bedding without complaint. Shen Tingting demanded that spot. Wang Zhaodi, still remembering the train insults, shot back. "This is my bed now. All you do is stand there sighing. Should I sigh along with you?" Shen Tingting was stunned. The quiet, obedient girl from the train had suddenly grown a spine. I followed the village chief to his home, a proper brick house, one of the nicest in the village. Staying here meant I could use my space privately and search for my grandfather without anyone watching. The yard had a wooden fence with gaps big enough to slip through, which was actually convenient. If it had been an iron gate, I'd have needed a different plan. The chief's wife, Auntie Song, welcomed me warmly and showed me to her married daughter's old room. It smelled slightly musty from years of disuse, but they'd put up fresh newspaper on the walls and swept the concrete floor clean. There were even leftover red, double happiness, characters from the daughter's wedding still on the walls. 2 village children ran over to stare at me with wide, curious eyes. I set down my things, gave each child a white rabbit candy, and handed the rest of the candy and a pack of crackers to Annie Song. Thank you for cleaning everything so nicely. I'm embarrassed by all the trouble. I'll be in your care for a while. Annie Song had grumbled that morning when her husband told her about hosting a military wife who'd been sent to the countryside. She thought the bureaucrats were ridiculous, making someone come down for just 2 months when she'd barely learned the work before leaving. She hadn't expected any perks from the arrangement, just planned to help out as a favor to her husband's old contacts. So when I handed her white rabbit candies and crackers, she was genuinely flustered. Even as the village chief's family, they only ate candy like that maybe once a year. She tried to push it back, but I told her that staying in such a nice room for free was already more than I deserved if she didn't. Except, I'd feel too embarrassed and would have to move to the dormitory. That settled it. She couldn't let me leave or she'd have to answer to her husband. She glanced at her 2 grandsons, Gooden and Erden, who were practically drooling onto the candy in their little hands. She nodded, and they tore open the wrappers instantly. Noticing how grimy I was from days of travel, Auntie Song offered to boil water for a bath. I asked where I could buy a wooden bathtub. Gooden's hand shot up. He knew the village carpenter, Old Lou, at the edge of the village. Both boys volunteered to take me. 10 minutes later, we found Old Lou in his workshop, a big man in a sweat-soaked undershirt sawing wood. He pointed me to his showroom. I picked out a bathtub and 3 wooden basins of different sizes, each smooth and finely crafted. The smallest one was for, well, delicate washing. Every basin had its purpose. The tub was the only one of its kind in stock, so I grabbed it right away. Old Lou confirmed I could take everything immediately. He noted to himself that I was clearly the fussy type. Educated youth rarely bought bathtubs. Most just splashed water and called it clean. But money was money, so he didn't complain. Gooden declared himself my official helper and carried all 3 basins on the walk home. He'd privately decided that anyone who gave him white rabbit candy was basically family, though he was smart enough not to say it out loud. Little Erden tried to help too, but Gooden refused. If the kid tripped and broke a basin, his entire life savings of a few fin couldn't cover it. On the way back, we ran into Shun Tingting, who was headed out with the other new arrivals to buy straw mats from a village woman. She eyed my bathtub with barely concealed envy, clearly annoyed I'd gotten there first and knowing she couldn't afford one herself. Song Qianjin also spotted me and mentally cataloged my advantages. Good family, beautiful, well supplied, with the single downside of having a fiancé. Wang Zhaodi waved at me, and I smiled back. Li Dabing, the guide, reminded me to come to the youth dormitory for dinner. They were holding a welcome party for the new arrivals. I agreed, figuring I had plenty of time to wash up and organize my room first. Back at the house, Auntie Song had the water ready. She offered to help me bathe, which I politely declined. Gooden set down the basins, stood up straight with his chest puffed out, clearly expecting praise. I rewarded him with another white rabbit candy right in front of his grandmother. Calling it his work payment, the bath would use water that had to be carried from outside and firewood to heat, so I was mentally accounting for all of it. Little Erden stood to the side, desperately wanting candy too, but too shy to ask, his tiny hands fidgeting nervously. I gave little Erden a fruit-hard candy, not as fancy as his brother's white rabbit, but his face lit up, and he thanked me politely. These kids had good manners. Auntie Song tried to stop me from giving away more treats, but could see I wasn't the type to be argued with. She asked what vegetables I liked so she could cook for me, but I told her the youth dormitory was hosting a welcome dinner, and I needed to attend. Soaking in the wooden tub later, I felt human again. That green train had nearly killed me. I scrubbed actual mud off my skin, then slipped into my space for a proper rinse. In the mirror, my complexion had improved noticeably, smoother and fairer than before. I remembered the village chief smoking pipe tobacco earlier and wondered if Liu Huijin's grandfather smoked too. I found tobacco seeds in my space and planted a few. Anything space-grown would be superior, and it was good to know what gifts to prepare. Then I turned my thoughts to the real reason I'd chosen this location, my maternal grandfather's family. Their story was heartbreaking. My birth mother, Lin Huiru, was the pampered only daughter of Lin Weigua, a veteran who had once taken a bullet for Liu Huijin's grandfather on the battlefield. That sacrifice had led to the arranged marriage between our families. Grandfather Lin had 2 sons and 1 daughter. The eldest, Lin Xinxi, had studied abroad and stayed overseas. The second son, Lin Yizhan, joined the military. After my mother's death, Uncle Yizhan was fighting on the front lines as a young battalion commander. The devastating news made him lose focus, and he took an enemy bullet to the leg. He was transferred to the Transportation Bureau after recovery. Years later, just as the family was healing, an anonymous report accused my grandfather of treason because of his son abroad. Uncle Yizhan was accused of deliberately getting wounded to sabotage military operations. The evidence was flimsy, but orders came swiftly. The death sentence was commuted to labor reform at a farm. Uncle Yizhan's wife fled, leaving their young son Lin Qingshan to accompany the old couple to the farm. In the original novel, none of them survived to see their names cleared. The immediate problems were Uncle Yizhan's bad leg. His gunshot wound had never properly healed due to poor field conditions, and my grandfather's hidden chronic pain from years of combat, which flared up in cold weather. He'd never told anyone about it. My solution was obvious. Spirit spring water. When I'd first drunk it, there were no dramatic effects, so mixed with ginseng and herbs, they'd just think it was effective traditional medicine. I couldn't reveal my space to anyone. The fewer people who knew about my cheat abilities, the better. I just needed to keep them alive and healthy until political winds shifted. Thinking about Heilongjiang's brutal winters, I planted a full plot of cotton seeds. Looking at my dwindling black soil, I realized I needed to upgrade my space more. By the spirit spring, I was pleased to find that even the ginseng grown from sliced pieces had survived and was thriving. The brigade leader had given us new arrivals 1 free day to settle in before work started. Tomorrow I'd go to the county pharmacy for medicinal herbs and try to find gold or jade jewelry to feed my space for upgrades and new seeds. During the train ride, I'd been growing wheat and rice in my space out of boredom, so grain was piling up again. But this time I wouldn't sell grain, it was too cheap. Gold and jewelry, worthless in this era's ideology, were far more valuable for my space's evolution. I pulled 2 cans of meat from my supplies for the welcome dinner. I couldn't show up empty-handed and didn't want to owe anyone favors. Canned meat was precious in this era, and I silently thanked Liu Huijin's mother again for her generosity. I really should have given them more apples. After freshening up, I put on a pale yellow dress that turned out to be more figure-flattering than expected. I was glad I'd only be here a few months with a military wife title protecting me. Otherwise, this kind of attention would invite trouble. I locked my belongings in the cabinet with a padlock I'd brought. Not that I distrusted the chief's family, but village doors stayed open all summer and anyone could wander in. At 5 o'clock, I headed out and found Gooden in the yard sorting vegetables. Auntie Song had prepared a bundle of fresh-picked green beans, cucumbers, and tomatoes for me to bring to the welcome dinner. I accepted gratefully and walked toward the youth dormitory. 2 veteran-educated youth had come back early to start cooking for the welcome dinner. The youth dormitory had a small plot of land for growing vegetables, but since everyone took turns caring for it, the produce was sparse and crooked, though at least there was some. I spotted the dormitory. From a distance, whitewashed walls covered in slogans like, "The vast countryside offers great possibilities," and "Go to the mountains and villages, transform heaven and earth." A girl named Li Mei was picking eggplants in the garden. She waved me over. Li Dabing had already told everyone about the very pretty new arrival named Su Nianyan. She had dirt all over her hands and told me to head inside while she finished picking. Wang Xiaodi ran out to take the vegetables from me and pulled me in. The dormitory had 5 rooms and a decent courtyard. She told me the other newcomers were still cleaning and the veteran youth would finish work in about half an hour. I offered to help and mentioned I'd brought 2 cans of meat. Wang Xiaodi's eyes went wide. She leaned in and whispered that the kitchen was only preparing 1 small dish with a tiny bit of cured meat. Bringing 2 whole cans was way too generous. I shrugged it off. With 19 people, 2 cans would only mean a couple bites of meat each. In the kitchen, a girl named Jiang Huahua was making cured pork with potatoes, heavy on the potatoes, light on the pork. When she saw my 2 cans of meat, she practically drooled and promised to make something worthy of them. Li Mei and Li Dabing heard about the canned meat and insisted I sit out the vegetable washing. Between the fresh produce and the meat I'd contributed, I'd done more than enough. Plus, my dress wasn't exactly suited for squatting in the dirt. While I was standing around feeling a bit awkward, Gao Jialong came out of his room and introduced himself. He was from Shanghai, well-dressed, clearly from a good family. He started trying to chat me up, asking about my hobbies, mentioning he liked reading and tea, basically showing off his feathers like a peacock. I sensed where this was heading and cut it short. I'm a military wife. Once my fiancé's marriage application goes through, I'll be leaving to join him at the base. His face froze. He'd arrived separately and didn't know anyone's situation. Shin Tingting had been eavesdropping from behind the door. She was furious that even a good-looking guy like Gao Jialong went straight for me. What was so special about me? Just a little fairer, a slightly better figure, a somewhat prettier face. She mentally cursed me for always pulling out the military wife card like I was above everyone else. As evening cooled the air, the mountains nearby took the edge off even the hottest summer days. The veteran youth returned from the fields. The senior girl, Yi Qingqing, greeted all 5 of us newcomers with handshakes and introductions. The male veterans couldn't stop staring at me. Dinner was served at tables pushed together in the courtyard. Shin Tingting looked at her coarse grain bun and the watery soup with a few flour lumps and tiny bits of meat, her face darkening by the second. She took 1 bite of the bun and winced. It was rough enough to scrape her throat. "Is this what we eat every day?" she asked. Yi Qingqing glanced at her, and Shin Tingting briefly looked relieved, hoping for better news. Then Yi Qingqing continued, "Usually we just have vegetable broth without the flour dumplings. Today there's actually meat in the soup. That's a real treat."